The US will be represented by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He says it's important Ukraine is prepared to do difficult things. The talks are taking place here in the port city of Jeddah. Saudi Arabia is emerging as a major power player. It's seen by both the United States and Russia as a neutral venue, and much is riding on these negotiations. The ambition from the delegations is that by the time they conclude, they hope that they will at least have the shape of what a ceasefire deal will look like.
Your country's in big trouble.
Can I answer?
No,
but there is a lot of work to do before that. Remember this?
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President,
a diplomatic spat to end all diplomatic spats in the Oval Office, which left US-Ukrainian relations in tatters. And in Ukraine, the consequences of the breakdown have been catastrophic. An uptick in Russian attacks after Washington cut off weapons shipments and intelligence sharing.
We want to do anything we can to get Ukraine to be serious about getting something done. You know, I say they don't have the cards. Nobody really has the cards. Russia doesn't have the cards. They don't have. What you have to do is you have to make a deal, and you have to stop the killing.
But the Russian position is far from clear. The Kremlin saying its objectives remain the same. It keeps all the territory, and Ukraine is demilitarized.
An awful lot of the evidence, including the language about this is Ukraine's fault they started the war, which is demonstrably a lie, that kind of thing does not suggest to me brilliant deal-making. That suggests to me that America has sadly begun to take sides with Vladimir Putin rather than with the democratic elected government in Ukraine.
This meeting in Jeddah will be watched closely by the Russians. But if Ukraine's position is weakened further, there may be no incentive for the Kremlin to make compromises and end its war. Alex Rossi, Sky News, Saudi Arabia.
Well, ahead of those peace talks, Ukraine launched one of its biggest drone attacks on Moscow since the war began, forcing the closure of 2 airports in the Russian capital. Well, the strikes sparked fires and damaged apartment buildings, with at least 1 person killed and 3 injured. Russia says at least 70 drones were approaching the city and that they were shot down. Well, back here, Laura's just getting all rigged up.
Sorry, just getting my earpiece
ready. So we're going to talk about the Prime Minister. He faces one of his biggest tests since the general election, really, and this is all centred around Murray, isn't it? Mike Amesbury announced that he would quit Parliament over his, obviously, that conviction assault. What's going to happen here, do you think? What's your prediction?
So, first of all, it's important to say the by-election technically hasn't been triggered yet because Mike Amesbury hasn't actually stood down yet. It's a bit of a weird, complicated process, but in his statement that he posted, he said he would be standing down in the coming days. So he hasn't actually stood down just yet. But when he does, a by-election will be triggered. So we won't have to go through the kind of rigmarole of a recall petition and all of that. It will just go straight to a by-election. Which we know that's what the government has been calling for, as well as the opposition, of course, because the opposition, whether that's Reform or the Tories, want this by-election to try and see if they can snatch that seat out of the jaws of Labour victory in 2024. Now, as you were outlining, he was originally jailed for 10 weeks for assaulting a constituent and then had an appeal, and then that was suspended. So he's obviously not serving a jail sentence now. However, what's interesting is he put out quite a long statement yesterday. He said it was a deeply regrettable incident. He called it a moment of madness. He said, you know, my actions are wrong and I've owned up to every minute of it. But what was really interesting was he then kind of went on to say, oh, context is important. And he said, you know, the public scrutiny and exposure that has brought about some distressing experiences. And he gave an example of being targeted by a stalker, saying that that could put you on edge. Now, some would argue, yes, context is important, but nonetheless, we have the rule of law for a reason, and context is there, really, but not necessarily utterly relevant when it comes to breaking the law or not, and physical assault, exactly. And he ended the statement by saying, "I must find a new job, but with a criminal conviction and a tarnished reputation. I have no one to blame but myself." Interesting, because, again, feels slightly like he's trying to invite a bit of sympathy here, that he's got a tricky job on his hands now, trying to find a new job. And, of course, anyone who's been convicted of any crime would say it's very difficult to find a job. But nonetheless, the rules are there for a reason. So, yes, I think there'll be a bit of a mixed bag in terms of the reaction to this. Yeah. But, as you say, this is a big, big test. I wouldn't say the biggest test of Starmer's premiership, because we've had foreign affairs.
Where it might go.
It is. It really is.
And if it does go to reform, what that means in the wider context.
Exactly. So if we look at what's happened, so in 2024, the general election, the results for this seat, Runcorn and Helsby, 53% Labour, very, very comfortable. And then far, far behind, 18% for Reform and 16% for Tories. So Tories and Reform almost neck and neck. There you go, you can see that on your screen. So incredibly comfortable victory for the Labour Party in that seat. Different thing with by-elections is by-elections are about taking the temperature of the public mood. Sometimes by-elections are about people kind of expressing their frustrations. So if Labour hangs on to this seat, that is a suggestion that actually, despite some of the polling, despite some of the wobbles, Labour's doing a good job and people feel comfortable with the direction in which they're taking the country. If Tory or Reform get it, that's an indication of a bit of a malaise, let's say, in the public opinion around the Labour Party. And the question will be, can Reform exploit this for political benefit? Is the mountain too high to climb? And is the Conservative Party potentially going to be languishing in the abyss of irrelevance?
Oh, all to play for, isn't it? Who said politics was dull?
Exactly.
There's never a dull day. Murray, thank you so much. Let's take a look at your weather.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A developing northerly wind will make it much colder over the next few days, with wintry showers and widespread overnight frosts. It's mostly fine now. Cold, of course, with an extensive frost over northern and central parts, but there are mainly coastal showers in the north and east. Northern parts will see showers spreading further inland this morning.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show. Stay with us, because Israel has cut electricity and aid supplies to Gaza. We'll be speaking to Save the Children about the situation, what it's like on the ground. Also, we'll speak to the Liberal Democrat MP appealing plans for an additional loan of £3 billion to Thames Water.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirmed that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight.
We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama.
Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record.
Sky News, the full story first.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up, we'll have all the latest sports, of course. But first, the UN has expressed deep concerns about Israel's latest decision to cut off the electricity supply to Gaza in another step in the ongoing humanitarian crisis in the Strip. Well, Rachel Cummings is Humanitarian Director in Gaza for Save the Children. Great to have you with us this morning. Just give us a sense, if you can, what the situation is like on the ground for you, for your teams, and for, in particular, children.
Thank you. Yeah, the situation in Gaza for children remains absolutely desperate. You know, we've now had the decision to cut electricity into Gaza, and that comes on the back of the decision at the beginning of this month to halt all humanitarian aid supplies coming into Gaza, and these are compounding problems for children. There isn't enough food for children in Gaza. We are expecting more tents. It's still bitterly cold in Gaza, so winter clothes are an essential lifeline for children here. So yeah, the situation remains very, very unpredictable and also very concerning.
And under these circumstances, Rachel, how are you able to make a difference for those children's lives?
You know, Save the Children, along with our partners and other agencies, will continue to provide life-saving essential services for as long as we can. We are here and we are standing in solidarity with the children of Gaza, and we're running primary healthcare centres, we're running nutrition centres, we're running child-friendly spaces, provide a degree of protection for children here. As I said, we will keep going for as long as we can, but we're in desperate need, as our children, of the essential supplies to allow us to keep going.
You say there, Rachel, that you'll do this for as long as you can. How long do you think you can keep going?
You know, we are hopeful that humanitarian supplies will come back online. We have to remain hopeful. And we're very resourceful. We've been working in Gaza for decades. And throughout this war, we've had to navigate the complexity of this crisis with supplies, with our teams as well, all of them having been displaced and impacted directly by the war. We've lost 2 staff members in this conflict. So we will remain resourceful and adapting to the context.
And how did you feel when electricity was cut off, aid supplies delayed, cut off? How does that feel when your job is there to help people?
You know, again, it's deeply distressing that these supplies and now the electricity has been turned off. And of course, we're very worried about the impact that that has and the longer term impact that that will have. But that electricity was generating power for a desalination plant in southern Gaza, which was providing water to thousands of people. So this is now a critical emergency in terms of being able to provide water and clean drinking water for thousands of people in Gaza.
And Rachel, just before we go, just what do you need in the short term just to make things easier for you and your team to help people?
Well, what the people of Gaza need is a definitive ceasefire, and we need unimpeded access to populations, and we need humanitarian supplies to be turned back on. We need the supplies to come into Gaza to be able to distribute and to be able to meet the needs of children in this desperate time.
OK, we'll leave it there. Rachel Cummings, thanks so much for your time and best of luck.
Thank you.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you. Do stay with us. We'll be speaking to a Liberal Democrat MP who says he'll go to court to stop Britain's biggest water company from ripping off customers. And then a big night in the Champions League for Liverpool. does their manager believe they can start talking about lifting the trophy just yet? We'll find out.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirmed that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight.
We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life.
They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record.
Sky News, the full story first.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello everyone, welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Coming up, we'll be speaking to a Liberal Democrat MP who says he'll go to court to stop Britain's biggest water company from ripping off customers. Elsewhere, the search for the last remaining crew members who went missing after an oil tanker collided with a cargo ship in the North Sea. Well, it's been called off. 36 others were rescued from the wreckage yesterday. Meanwhile, there are serious environmental concerns following the incident off the coast of East Yorkshire. The combination of burning jet fuel and toxic chemicals are threatening both marine wildlife and birds in the area, as well as coastal and fishing communities. A British tourist on a backpacking holiday has been detained in the US for the past 10 days. This is due to a mistake with her visa. 28-year-old Rebecca Burke was trying to cross into the state of Washington when she was refused entry and taken to a detention facility. And there's been a slide in the Asian markets this morning after a sell-off on Wall Street over fears of a US recession. Financial markets have been volatile on the back of rising trade tensions coupled with signs of slowing economic growth in America. And talks between the US and Ukraine on ending the war will be held in Saudi Arabia today, with officials saying that Kyiv will propose a limited ceasefire. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky won't be at the talks, however. He has met Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. OK, that's your top stories there, but let's get more on our main story and that container ship and the oil tanker that collided in the North Sea. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has been taking a look at how the collision happened.
Thousands and thousands of miles of sea all around, yet two ships in a direct and fiery collision. Here's what we know about the ships and the moments up to and immediately after the crash. Now, the Coastguard said the alarm went at 9:48. It was sounded the site of the collision in the North Sea, 13 miles off the coast of Yorkshire. One of the ships, the Stena Immaculate, was anchored at the time, meaning it was stationary after sailing from Greece, according to ship tracking site Vessel Finder. The cargo vessel, So Long, was sailing from Grangemouth in Scotland to Rotterdam in the Netherlands at a speed of 16 knots, around 18 miles an hour, on a direct collision course with the Immaculate. Now, both ships have radar systems, which means they should have been able to detect each other at a distance of 24 miles out, experts have told us. And at 10 miles away, nautical miles away, the vessels should have been visible, although there were reports of fog and haze this morning.
If it's been put on autopilot and there's nobody on the bridge, which could happen, then it will just keep going straight on. It's, and that's what happens with a lot of the vessels. They have autopilot and it just steers the course. They don't deviate. They don't have any. There's no bends in the sea. It just goes straight. It just goes straight for miles, hundreds of miles.
Now, So Long is a Portuguese-flagged cargo vessel, 140 metres long, with a gross tonnage of 7,852. That's a measure of its volume. Put it in perspective, the tanker Stena Immaculate is, or was, much bigger, 183 metres long, with a gross tonnage of nearly 30,000. Now, it was carrying jet fuel, and that ignited, so much so that it was visible from space. This is a satellite image taken at the same time with a huge plume of smoke clearly identifiable. At 10:20 a.m, the Coastguard tasked a number of lifeboats to support its response. Several lifeboats, a Coastguard rescue helicopter, were dispatched to the scene in the North Sea, along with a plane and nearby vessels with firefighting capability. Now, all that quick action meant the entire tanker crew was taken ashore safely. But the Marine Accident Investigation Branch has already sent investigators to Grimsby to understand why one ship apparently ploughed into another.
Liberal Democrat MP Charlie Maynard has appealed the High Court's judgment on plans that would see an additional £3 billion loan added to Thames Water's existing debt of over £16 billion. The business has previously said it will run out of cash by the 24th of March, and the loan would prevent the business from collapsing. I'm pleased to say we're joined by Charlie Maynard, a Liberal Democrat MP, in the studio. So Thames Water is saying actually this move will be a benefit to customers, a benefit to the environment. Your thoughts on the judgment?
Well, thanks for having me on. This move is not benefiting customers at all. So we've got this enormous debt mountain, and what they're proposing doing is adding even more debt on top of that. And meanwhile, every customer in the Thames Water catchment area has just got a 35% increase on their bill. The finances of this company are a complete mess. I'm just going to give you one number there. So right now, we've got this debt mountain that you laid out, add another 3 on top. Meanwhile, so that's nearly £20 billion. Meanwhile, we've just got 1.2 billion of cash flows coming in every year. That was to March 24. So it's completely unsustainable. 2 rating agencies have just marked it down to almost the lowest credit rating you can have, deep into junk bond territory. If this was anything but a utility, it would already be in bankruptcy. And that's what we're advocating, that this should be put into something called special administration, which is bankruptcy, so that we can cut that debt mountain, put the balance sheet into a strong financial position again, and then we can start fixing our sewage treatment works and pipe networks.
If things don't change, if you're not successful in appealing this, what happens to customers and the debt as well? Who do they owe this money to?
Well, they owe this money to a bunch of hedge funds and all sorts of investment funds that have come in on the cheap through the markets, bought the debt cheap. They are going to end up owning that new part of equity. They will be totally in charge of that situation. They've got full control both over the debt, and they will have control over the equity, and then they'll probably flog it to somebody else for a quick buck.
What's your thoughts on what will happen next then? Where are you at?
Well, so we've got the appeals court today. So it's today, tomorrow, and Thursday. There'll be a decision passed down very likely quite soon after that. A judgment may be at the same time, as in what's the rationale for the decision, or that may be a few days later. Then there'll be a question as to whether an appeal is granted to that to go to the Supreme Court. That's entirely in the hands of the judges. But that is a scenario. But the ultimate question is, does this restructuring plan get through, or does it fail? If it gets through, then the company's in the hands of the creditors. If it fails, it goes into special administration, most likely.
Are you confident?
I don't know. It's entirely in the hands of the judges. I'm just making the best case because there's 16 million customers here who are not represented at all, and yet we are paying for this through our bills. And that, one of the reasons why I've gone so far at this is because we as 16 million customers, it's on our backs that the bill is actually being levelled, and we should be in that courtroom. And I'm very grateful to the justices to let us be in the courtroom to make the case that the customers deserve a place at the table.
You would have seen, we're covering in the news, the oil tanker, container ship collision, huge impacts for the environment, marine life across the coast. You know, you're a big campaigner for clean water. What are your thoughts today on what we're seeing?
First of all, the people who have been impacted by it, hearts go out to it because it's just awful in terms of the pain and cost of that. I think it's too early to tell exactly what is going on in terms of how much environmental damage has been there. We need to understand what went wrong and learn from that to make sure that we avoid mistakes like this in the future.
And then just lastly, Charlie Maynard, the welfare bill. We're covering that on the show today. We've got representatives from the government. It'd be great to get the Lib Dems' thoughts on this. It's unsustainable, isn't it? 1 in 8 people,
I'm here
young
to talk
people.
about Thames Water. I'm not going to go there because I've got a spokesperson there who covers that, and I'll leave it with them.
But surely you'll have a view on the day's stories. 1 in 8 young people are not in work, not in training. That's a huge bill. Some suggesting it's unsustainable. It'd be great to get the Lib Dems' views on that, and you're here today as a representative.
That's right, and that's fine, but I'm here on Thames Water, and what I'm focusing entirely on today is the court case, which has been taken by...
Of course, which we gave you plenty of time to talk about,
that's what I'm going to focus on.
Which was great to hear your thoughts and how you're campaigning on that.
Well, I've told you, I'm going to leave that there.
There's no opinion from the Lib Dems, then?
There's no opinion from me today because I'm focusing on the water case, which is where we need to stand up for the 16 million customers.
OK, it's a shame you can't give an opinion on something that's quite big for our audience today. We will put those views on that welfare bill to the government, of course, and the opposition, not today from the Liberal Democrats, which is quite a shame. Let's take a look at the sport, then.
Thank you.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report. Sky Business sponsors this report.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show, we'll be discussing the stories making news today with our political correspondent, Mari Aurora.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight.
We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life.
They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record.
Sky News, the full story first.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back, everyone. We will kick off our news review very shortly, but let's go through what Wilfred has got coming up from 7 o'clock. Claims of the biggest building boom in a generation. Housing Minister Matthew Pennycook joins us at 7:15. Then at 8:30, there's a big concern from the father of a British backpacker detained in the US for the past 10 days. And then after 9, we're going to speak to an oceanographer about the disaster unfolding in the North Sea after that collision with a US tanker and a container ship. So do stay with us. Mari's here. We're going to go through the papers. Yeah. Let's start with the Financial Times this morning, please, Mari. And this is another interesting turn of events. Musk's looks at, that's Elon Musk, backing a rival to reform. This is after the splinters seem to be appearing in reform. Basically, the owner of X, the billionaire Tesla owner too, is backing an alternative to Reform UK. This is following that spat. It was only last week between Nigel Farage and then Rupert Lowe. And obviously, last year sometime, wasn't it? Elon Musk came out and said, I will pledge huge amounts of money to Reform UK to boost them. And the splinters seem to be emerging. And how much of this is a you know, something that will fall away very quickly, or a bigger problem for reform? We've got that by-election, haven't we, coming up? And the story starts to build, doesn't it? And starts to unravel, which I'm finding quite fascinating. And where this goes for Rupert Lowe, because I think it was, again, only a few weeks ago that Elon Musk tweeted that Rupert Lowe should be the leader of reform. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage is kind of trying to hold on to the reins and saying that everything is bright and breezy.
Yeah. I think it's indicative of a few things. I think it's indicative of Elon Musk not necessarily being very good at politics. It's important to remember, just because Elon Musk is in the White House doesn't mean he knows what he's doing when it comes to politics. He's good at business. He's good at money. He's good at efficiency savings. He's not a politician. He's not an elected politician. And it's important to remember that, because he has never had to understand what it means to be electable. And I think the difficulty with reform and Rupert Lowe, if you speak to some on the kind of Nigel Farage side of it, is that some of the policy areas that Rupert Lowe was trying to talk about, you know, mass deportations, they believe are not palatable to a mainstream audience. So if you want to stay as a fringe party on the edges, then that's fine. But if you genuinely want to be in with a chance of winning a general election or being the main party in opposition, then they believe that those kinds of more extreme policies are never going to get you there. And it feels slightly like Elon Musk doesn't actually understand that nuance.
What he also doesn't understand is that voters don't like infighting. You don't want to vote for a party that's got a spat on their hands, because if they're fighting amongst themselves, how are they going to deal with immigration, hospital waiting lists, crumbling schools?
And also, I think he forgets that the UK is not the same as America, right? So, first of all, people don't necessarily think that Elon Musk's involvement in a political party is a good thing. Don't necessarily think it's helpful. And also, it's important to say that actually the same policies, if they were announced in the US and the UK, might get a very different reaction. Look at President Trump's approval ratings in America compared to in the US. He's actually lost a lot of backing here in the UK in the past few weeks because of his policies on Ukraine and tariffs, etc. So it's important to remember it's a very different electorate. Yes, there are, of course, similarities, but nonetheless, it's not the same.
OK, let's move on to the Daily Telegraph. Farmers hit again in Angela Rayner land grab. So what is this all about, that owners could have to force to sell off land at a lower...
Yes, so this is all about the planning and infrastructure bill that is published today. So once it is published, we'll be able to see that detail and pore over it for our viewers. But essentially, what has been reported is that farmers are going to be forced to sell their fields for less than its potential value. Now, potential is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. So basically, they have these compulsory purchase orders, and this is all about the government saying, you know, this is for the public interest, this is for the public good. We need these hospitals, we need these schools, we need these infrastructure projects, and therefore we are going to buy this land at its current value and then build on it. And this was already happening under the Conservatives, so it's nothing new. But what is happening is essentially they are loosening the rules around these compulsory purchase orders so that it doesn't include what they call the hope value. So the hope value is all what it could potentially be worth if planning permission was granted and certain things were done with the land, right? And that would obviously be much higher than its current value. And the government is now saying that's enough. We are going to stop paying over the odds for this land. So what they say is fair compensation rather than inflated prices that are costing the taxpayer a huge amount of money. That was the manifesto pledge. Angela Rayner has been speaking to reporters, and she's called it the biggest building boom in a generation, unleashing economic growth and lifting the bureaucratic burden. Farmers, of course, are furious about this, think it's another attack on them from a Labour government that is anti-farmer, as it were. It's important to say, so the Tories already actually started this. So under the Conservative Party, public authorities were allowed to remove hope value, provided... this was actually changed in the Levelling Up Act of 2023, but it needed sign-off by a Minister, Secretary of State. And what Labour's doing now is saying, actually, that can be provided by inspectors, councils or mayors. It doesn't need to be the Secretary of State if there is no objection. So they are just kind of loosening that. However, if a piece of land has already the planning permission, then they will be paid that hope value. So if they've already got the planning permission, they will be paid for the value of if that project was made. Whereas if they haven't actually got any planning permission, then what they're saying is, you can't just say, oh, it might be worth this, so pay us the max. What they're saying is, we'll pay you what it's worth unless you've already got planning permission.
Okay,
and it's dividing, as you can see, opinion.
Of course. We're going to move on, lastly, to the Telegraph. Secret chickenpox parties in Play Centre are branded selfish. So even when I was young, I remember people talking about having chickenpox parties so you can catch the virus and then it's out of the way and you don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
But parents have been criticised for planning these up and down the country. And in one particular centre, the owner of a soft play area where it was set to take place basically has been criticised for allowing it to potentially happen. Obviously, in 2023, in November, there was an announcement from the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation saying that a vaccine should actually be offered to all babies to avoid this, because it's an irritation more than anything else. It was a blessing when my kids got it in the Easter holidays together at home. It was great. But it's one of those things that hangs over lots of children, lots of parents. Parties were previously, like I said, quite commonplace. So it's just interesting how it's spiking up again. When there is a vaccine available at the moment, you can actually buy it privately and have it. We didn't have to do it because they got it in the end. So interesting that that's rearing its head.
Fascinating. Gosh.
Once again. I remember getting chickenpox. It was very,
I've still got the scars.
So I think that's all from us today, Mari. It's been a pleasure to have your company here in the 6 to 7 hour. But guess what? Wilfred Frost will be joining us after a short break. Let's take a look at your weather before that.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A developing northerly wind will make it much colder over the next few days, with wintry showers and widespread overnight frost. It's mostly fine now, but cold also, with an extensive frost over northern and central parts. But there are some mainly coastal showers in the north and east.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the President as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Good morning. It's 7 o'clock. On today's show, the worst maritime collision in recent British history. 36 crew members rescued, but one still missing.
Plus, a big test coming up for the Prime Minister. The government faces its first by-election after former Labour MP Mike Amesbury quits Parliament over his conviction for assault.
And fashion fit for a king and queen. We'll tell you about the new royal exhibition with a twist.
It's Tuesday, March the 11th. Your headlines. Fires are still burning on two ships that collided in the North Sea. Environmentalists warn of an ecological catastrophe.
Here in Grimsby, the search for the last remaining crew member has now been called off after that serious collision between an oil tanker and cargo ship off the East Yorkshire coast.
Also ahead, a British tourist on a backpacking trip around North America is detained by US authorities for 10 days over a visa issue. Asian markets slide after a major sell-off on Wall Street over fears of a US recession. Moscow's biggest airport suspends flights after a Ukrainian drone attack as peace talks get underway in Saudi Arabia. A very good morning to you. The search for a crew member who went missing after a ship carrying toxic chemicals collided with an oil tanker in the North Sea has been called off. 36 others were rescued from the wreckage yesterday. An investigation into the incident has begun, and the authorities are working to contain what's threatening to be an environmental catastrophe. Tom Parmenter has this first report for us from Grimsby.
The collision sparked explosions and fireballs. It was a low-speed crash with extraordinary impact. The tanker, the Stena Immaculate, had been anchored 12 miles off the coast. It was carrying aviation fuel, which has been spilling into the North Sea.
So Long has collided with tanker Stena Immaculate in the outer anchorage. Both vessels are abandoning.
Despite extensive searches, one crew member from the cargo ship was not found. Everybody else on these two vessels was rescued and made it back to land.
36 of them were brought safely ashore here at Grimsby. But what they're dealing with out at sea is one of the worst maritime collisions in recent British history.
The tanker was carrying aviation fuel on behalf of the US Navy. It was struck by the Solong, a cargo ship which had 15 containers of a toxic compound called sodium cyanide on board. Exposure to it can be serious. It can cause heart or breathing problems and even prove fatal to humans. As the seriousness of the situation emerged, the port authorities stopped all boats leaving the docks along this coastline.
VTS has put a total stop on all sailings. Nobody can get out.
It's very unusual that the shipping's actually ceased. This will cost millions of pounds just in lost revenue for the actual of the ports.
Inside the exclusion zone at sea, lifeboat crews, tugboats and other vessels were all trying to help.
A lot of people watching this would struggle to understand how two big modern vessels can collide like that.
This morning it was dense fog. Ships are on a tight schedule a lot of the time. One ship is answered. All the electronics, what modern ships have, even small boats have a lot of electronics. But somebody's got to be watching the electronics and also looking out the window.
Local leaders here have called on the government to implement a rapid action plan to contain the pollution.
There will need to be some form of clear-up operation. Of course, it's tidal in the Humber, so we have to wait for it to be a high tide to get large vessels back into port. But there will be some really serious concerns about what that will mean for local marine life and the environment more broadly.
Wildlife charities are now waiting to see what impact this has for seabirds, seals and the marine environment. The true impact of this is still not known. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Grimsby.
Well, our North of England correspondent Katie Barnfield joins us now live from Grimsby. What is the latest this morning, Katie?
Good morning. Well, yes, the very latest is that the search has now, unfortunately, been called off for that remaining crew member. We know that that person was a member of the crew of the So Long. The Coastguard here called off that search just before 10 o'clock last night. We know that all the remaining crew members from both ships have now been marked safe and accounted for. We understand that one person was taken to hospital for treatment. All the others were treated here in Grimsby by ambulance crews. So what do we know so far about this collision? We know that the oil tanker, the Stena Immaculate, was stationary at the time of the crash. It was anchored off the coast of Hull. We know that it was carrying 220,000 barrels of jet fuel for the US Navy at the time of the crash, and that crews from both ships abandoned the vessels after multiple explosions on board. We know that all vessels are being docked here in Grimsby in port, not allowed to go out to sea because that tanker is still spilling oil into the North Sea at the moment. And we understand that the fire on the Stena Immaculate is still burning this morning, almost 24 hours after that impact. And now that the rescue operation has finished and the search for that last crew member has been called off, the focus now moves on trying to understand exactly how this happened. The Marine Accident Investigation Branch has started a preliminary investigation, but we know it's the flag states of both of the carriers that will be ultimately responsible, the US and Portugal, for figuring out exactly what happened here.
Katie Barnfield, thanks so much for joining us. Much appreciated. Now, a British tourist on a backpacking holiday has been detained in the US for the past 10 days over a mistake with her visa. Sadia's with me now to tell us more about this story. I guess, Sadia, the crux of it comes down to whether exactly she was a tourist or not.
Exactly. So Rebecca Burke was on a backpacking holiday across North America. She'd spent some time in New York and in Oregon, and she was on her way into Canada when she was stopped by Canadian authorities and turned back to go back into the US. And it's upon her re-entry to the US that there are reports that she was handcuffed and taken to a detention facility, and it all is around whether or not she was a tourist. So she went in on a tourist visa, as far as we know, but while she was staying in Oregon, she sort of stayed with a family where, in exchange for her accommodation, she did some household work around their house. So there is some sort of blurred lines about whether or not that constitutes as employment. Her family say that she was a tourist. They say she was essentially part of another family then. They say that they've spoken to her. She's in an orange jumpsuit. She's isolated, and that she's being kept in horrendous conditions. They don't think of her as an immigrant, but they see this as a direct impact of Donald Trump's crackdown on immigration, which, as you know, is particularly key around that Canada-US border, where both countries have been talking about immigration for the last little while. She wants to return home. She says she'll come back voluntarily. Her family are now warning others who are thinking of travelling to the US to be very careful and to double, triple check what their visa requirements are.
It's unclear to me, at least, exactly what the usual course of action would have been, say, a year ago for this sort of thing. But either way, 10 days in detention for, doing some housework seems excessive.
Absolutely. So she's been kept 10 days already. There is no end in sight. We don't know what's going to happen. But again, as you say, it is quite unusual. Previously, we haven't seen cases like this, but 10 years for something that isn't quite 10 days, sorry, for something that isn't quite clear-cut, whether she was in employment or whether indeed she was just purely there for tourism purposes.
Sadia, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. And by the way, we're going to be talking to Becky's dad, Paul. He'll join us at 8:30 for an update and also, of course, to explore exactly what the government are doing or not to help her situation. Now, Asian markets have taken a slide this morning after a major sell-off on Wall Street over recession fears in the US yesterday. Let's bring in our Asia correspondent, Nicole Johnson, who's in Beijing for us. Nicole, yesterday we saw the US NASDAQ index, the tech-heavy NASDAQ, sell off 4%. It was the worst one-day move for 2.5 years in the US. How is Asia reacting? Because one of the triggers was fears over a US recession, but it's clearly affecting global markets.
Absolutely. Clearly what happens in the United States isn't contained there. A great deal of concern and uncertainty across Asia, Australia, Japan, South Korea, all of their share markets were down initially 2 to 3%, quite significant. Later in the day it rallied though, and across Asia all sorts of losses were recorded today because Asia is watching very closely what's happening with these US tariffs. We've had 20% on China. Asia doesn't know what is coming. President Trump is talking about reciprocal tariffs. And Asia, of course, is heavily dependent on the US export market. So a great deal of sort of fear and uncertainty is really beginning to rattle the markets here.
Yeah, and particularly the rhetoric, both late last week and yesterday, that the US administration is willing to take short-term pain for long-term gain is what's been hurting market sentiment that, in particular, the stock market is reflecting. Added to that, yesterday, there was more focus on the latest AI announcement out of China, which I guess is a reason why we saw US tech stocks in particular sell off so much. Talk us through the focus on, we had DeepSeek a month or so ago. What's the latest coming out of China?
Again, it goes to show just how much attention the world is placing on China and its technology development. So the latest one is called Menace AI. And some people are calling it a breakthrough. They're saying it has independent thought and action, that it can make its own decisions, that not only would it help us with our jobs, that it could actually replace us. Now, it's early days. It will be assessed, this model. It's still difficult to really know, and some tech analysts are saying it's all a lot of overhype, that it makes factual errors, that it's not as good as it's cracked up to be. But again, it's rattled the United States, those tech markets. Anything that happens in China right now because of the developments with DeepSeek, the world is paying close attention, and we can see that we are really in the middle of a global artificial intelligence race between the United States and China. And ever since DeepSeek, it's clear that China has well and truly caught up to some extent.
Nicole, as always, thanks so much. Nicole Johnson for us there in Beijing. Time for all of the day's other stories now, and Leah's got that for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Morning, by the way. Our top story then, Ukraine has launched what appears to be the largest drone attack on Moscow since the war began, killing at least one person and forcing the closure of airports in the Russian capital. Well, the region's governor said 9 people, including a child, were injured in the strikes, which also led to fires and damaged 7 apartment buildings. Russia's defence ministry says more than 330 Ukrainian drones were either intercepted or shot down. 90 of them were aimed at Moscow. Well, the attack comes just hours ahead of crucial peace talks between Ukrainian and US officials in Saudi Arabia aimed at ending the war. President Zelensky will not be at the meeting with the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, but his team will be hoping to restore relations following the Oval Office row between Ukraine's leader and President Trump last month. The chairman of the Sentencing Council has criticised the Justice Secretary for comments over sentencing guidelines, saying they should not be dictated by ministers. Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood had raised concerns over new guidance that allows judges to consider a defendant's ethnicity when deciding whether to send them to prison. Her request to reverse the policy was rejected by Lord Justice William Davis in a strongly worded letter. Officials from more than 30 nations are meeting in Paris today for more Ukraine talks. French President Emmanuel Macron is set to address the gathering, which will discuss a security force for Kyiv to deter Russia from launching another offensive. It comes after last week's emergency summit in Brussels. And a new study suggests children who regularly eat fish could be more sociable and kinder to their friends. Researchers from the University of Bristol say it's a result of the nutrients in seafood having a positive effect on brain development and cognitive function. The long-term study found that children who ate no fish were more likely to display substandard
What about
social
adults?
behaviour. Do you know, I had sea bass last night,
and
that's why I said good morning to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Also, I would just like to say fish is available in other forms, not just fish fingers. I saw that on
No.
Yes, of course, for
No.
kids. My parents never let me eat
I'm with
fish
you,
fingers.
Mari.
My parents made me eat an actual fish. There was a head on it, there was a tail on it, you had to pick the bones out. Sorry,
Well,
that is not the only way you can eat a fish as a child.
Supermarkets now do sort of adult-sized fish fingers.
Yeah, there's nothing like
Delicious. Yeah, exactly. More expensive, but I don't care. They're delicious because you do get a little bit frowned
Wow.
if you're having bird's eye fish fingers, the small ones. But
Yeah.
great. In fact, my son hasn't got onto them yet, graduated, but I look forward to the day he does.
Yeah.
Because I'll be nicking quite a few of them.
Yeah.
And then the next morning,
You'll be so
I'll be
kind.
really nice.
There you go, and he'll be in a good mood as well.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks very much for that. As you can see, Mari has joined us because the Prime Minister faces his first big electoral test since the general election after Mike Amesbury did announce he would quit Parliament over his conviction for assault, therefore triggering a by-election in Runcorn and Helsby. Mari, I guess this simplifies the process to a by-election. It's not like fully confirmed exactly when it'll be yet. But talk us through the latest running in this and expectations.
Yes, so, as you say, it simplifies it. There's no recall petition. It's important to say he hasn't actually stood down as an MP yet. He said he's going to do it in the coming days. So until he does that, we can't actually trigger the by-election. The writ cannot be moved, as it were, in parliamentary speak. It's also important to say that until he does quit as an MP, he is still claiming his £90,000 a year salary. But nonetheless, when that does happen, it will be really interesting to see who will win this by-election. Now, if you look at the figures from the general election, it looks like a really comfortable Labour win. So Labour on 53% of the vote, you can see on your screens there. Reform far behind on 18%, and then the Tories a little bit further behind on 16%. So you would assume that this would be a really safe seat for Labour. However, by-elections are very much a litmus test. They are there to take the temperature of the feeling in terms of public opinion and the votership and how they are feeling about government policies. And therefore, if Labour can hang on to this seat, they will see that as a massive win, but also an indication that actually the public is still with them when it comes to the project, the journey that they are wanting to take the country on. However, if they do lose this by-election, well, they'll say, oh, incumbent governments never win by-elections. But nonetheless, if they do lose this by-election, it will be an indication that the public is perhaps not with Keir Starmer and his project in the way that he would like after not even a year in power. But also, if Reform win this by-election, that will be a huge seismic moment for that party, considering the jump they will have to make from 18% to actually winning it outright. The danger for the Conservative Party, now, it's not the kind of seat that you would expect them to win, but nonetheless, if there was a by-election, you would expect them to be the next in line normally. If they don't come in second or first, the concern will be, are they beginning to become irrelevant as a party? And that's the danger for the Conservatives.
It's going to be fascinating to watch. As you said, Mari, we don't know exactly when it'll be yet, but certainly all eyes on it, Mari, for now. Thanks so much. Let's have a look at what's on the front pages now. And the eye leads on the collision off the Yorkshire coast between a tanker and a chemical cargo vessel, which caused a massive fire and repeated explosions. The Metro sums the events up in one word: catastrophic, after the collision prompted concern over possible fuel spills. The Times adds that if 18,000 tonnes of fuel spill is put at risk, there are rare habitats along the coast. Let's discuss this and all of the day's news with the government. Matthew Pennycook, the Minister of State at the Department for Housing, joins us. So very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Do you have any updates on the boat collision from the government in terms of what can be done to limit the damage, and as well with the one missing person still not found?
Let me say in the first instance, obviously, it's a fast-evolving situation. Our thoughts are with all those affected in particularly the family of the missing crew member. And our thanks obviously go to the Coastguard, the RNLI and the emergency services for their work in responding. An investigation is taking place, but US and Portuguese authorities are the flag states for the vessels involved. The UK is obviously assisting in that investigation. And in terms of the ongoing work to ensure any potential impact on water pollution in the environment, that work is underway, but it's a particularly fast-moving situation. The fire is still raging. We don't think air quality in the area has breached dangerous limits. As I say, it's obviously a very dynamic situation.
I wanted to get your quick reaction as well to the British tourist, Rebecca Burke, who's been detained in the US for 10 days now for what appears like, while on a tourist visa, only doing some housework. We're speaking to her father in the next hour. Is the government working with the US to try and secure her release and return to the UK?
So I'm limited in what I can say on this case, but we are aware of that UK national who's been detained in the United States. We're providing support. We're in contact with the local authorities in the area, but that's about all I can say at this stage on that particular case.
Is it more important to maintain good relations with Donald Trump?
I don't think that's an issue in this particular case. I think the individual is detained for very specific reasons, we're providing support to them and are in contact with the local authorities in the area.
Today we get to the point where the planning bill is published, and we'll get to see all of the details of it. And there's obviously still a relatively long way to go. I noticed the title of your press release is the biggest building boom in a generation. When will that actually begin? This year? Next year? Will it take 2 years before the effects of this bill actually take effect?
Well, it's already begun in the sense that in our first 8 months in office, we've undertaken perhaps the biggest overhaul of the planning system in a generation. We've already overhauled the National Planning Policy Framework within our first 6 months to ensure it's pro-growth, pro-housing supply to meet that Plan for Change milestone of 1.5 million new homes across the Parliament. The Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which we're introducing today, which will be transformative, it's a flagship bill. It will help speed up and streamline the delivery of new homes and critical infrastructure. But it's just the latest step in that reform programme, and there'll be more to come after this legislation. This is a whole-of-Parliament mission to get the country building again, to get the homes and the infrastructure we need in every part of the United Kingdom.
Obviously, I can't read the text of the bill yet because you haven't published it, but we'll get a chance to do that later today. Scanning through your press release and the sort of subtitles, compulsory purchase reform and development corporations really jump out, and what you're saying about those. You also just said it will be transformative. So for our viewers at home and having not read the full bill yet, I mean, put that in context for us. Are you sort of saying that if it's a big national important infrastructure house building project, that nothing will be able to get in its way? If this had been passed before HS2, would the idea of a bat tunnel be far in the distance?
We can speak about the bat tunnel specifically if you like to. I think there are three main things the bill's trying to do. It's firstly going to introduce a more certain and faster consenting process for nationally significant infrastructure projects, so that big major critical infrastructure that when I go around different parts of the country, everyone says it's just too difficult to get anything built. You know, we haven't had a water reservoir, for example, built in the last 30 years, and the water situation over the coming decades will become critical. So that's one aspect. Introducing a new nature recovery fund to ensure we can unlock and accelerate development and protect and improve the environment, and a more streamlined and modernised local planning system and strategic planning where councils are being forced to work together more sensibly about cross-boundary issues. So all that package of reform. On the Nature Recovery Fund, yes, absolutely, we do want to avoid bat tunnels. The bat tunnel is a symptom of a system that is failing to produce optimal outcomes, both in terms of development and in terms of nature recovery and restoration. And the problem with the bat tunnel is the system at the moment is geared up to very onerous, lengthy and costly site-by-site assessments and obligations, when really we can take a much more strategic view across a wider area. And through the bill, natural income will be put in place to develop what are called environmental delivery plans to ensure that, as I say, developers can pay into a fund, they can get going on development, but over a wider geographic area, we're getting more sensible outcomes. So not in the case of the bat tunnel, just protecting the animals in that particular location, but what can we do about the population of bats across a much wider area to restore and recover their population size.
Compulsory purchase reform, obviously making it easier for you to buy land, to put a railway down or whatever it might be, sounds sensible to lots of people. It's going to upset farmers, though, landowners?
We're not targeting farmers particularly, and actually I think the real potential of the CPO powers in the bill is in urban areas on previously developed brownfield land, where we know we've got to do more to unlock that land for development. But these reforms are a sensible evolution, radical in some ways, but an evolution of what has come before. We do need to do more to unlock land if we're going to get the homes and infrastructure we need. The previous government legislated to introduce powers on CPO to allow the disapplication of what's called hope value on schemes where there's a real public interest, high levels of affordable housing, health or education establishments. The bill goes further, makes that process more efficient, makes the administration less costly. And we do want local authorities, and it will be local authorities rather than ministers, to use these powers to bring forward appropriate sites, as I say, in particular, regeneration projects in urban areas.
I wanted to ask you about this quite extraordinary reply from a letter that the Justice Secretary sent to the head of the Sentencing Council. And the Sentencing Council's chair replied in relation to the Justice Secretary's concerns over a two-tier justice reform, saying, quote, "At no stage did the Lord Chancellor, the Justice Secretary's representative, express any concern or reservation about the term now under debate. The walkthrough of the guideline with officials from Ministry of Justice took place on Monday, the 3rd of March. Again, no concern was expressed about the relevant term." It's quite extraordinary, that, isn't it? Was the Justice Secretary asleep at the wheel?
No, and I think the Justice Secretary's made her views very clear. And the government's view is everyone is equal under the law. We don't want to see differential treatment for anyone, whatever their background. We've made clear we don't agree with this policy. And the Justice Secretary has asked the Sentencing Council to rethink and rescind the guidance. They've issued a reply late last night. The Justice Secretary will meet them later in the week to press her case again. But we've been very clear that we will take action through legislation if required. And we are going to review the role of the Sentencing Council alongside the role of ministers and Parliament in determining policy, because it is ministers that determine policy. And while we absolutely value and respect the independence of the judiciary, ministers have that obligation to set policy. And we've been very clear, Justice Secretary has been very clear on this occasion, we don't agree with this particular policy, which arose, as you will know, out of a consultation begun by the previous government.
Correct. And coming back to the point about whether the department, the Justice Secretary's department, was asleep at the wheel, the letter also noted the guideline was discussed 15 times between July 2022 and January 2025. How was this not spotted?
I'm not going to speak for the individual civil servants who were in whatever particular meeting.
So you're blaming it on the civil servants?
Not blaming it on civil servants, but I think the Justice Secretary could not have been clearer about her view and the government's view.
We get that, but Robert Jenrick brought this to her attention. She wasn't aware of this until then.
Well, Robert Jenrick, if you...
That's
correct
fine.
Correct me if I'm wrong, was a government minister at the time that
and I've held him to account about that, and I will hold the Conservatives to account about that. But you're blaming a civil service by implication.
I'm not blaming a civil service.
OK, so who's responsible for it?
I don't know who was in what meetings, is what I'm saying, but
But there's 15 meetings and 15 sets of minutes where it can be referred to, of which 8 months' worth were whilst you're in government. Is it fair to say that you're asleep at the wheel, to not notice this until
I don't think it is fair. I'd say I don't know what meetings took place with what individuals were in the room, but the Justice Secretary could not have been clearer about her view and the government's position on this issue, and what we want the Sentencing Council to do in terms of rethinking and rescinding that guidance, and the steps we are prepared to take if they don't think again.
Matthew Pennicott, great to see you this morning. Thanks
Thank you very much.
Good to see you. Let's have a look at the weather.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A developing northerly wind will make it much colder over the next few days, with wintry showers and widespread overnight frosts. It's mostly fine but cold now, with an extensive frost over northern and central parts. But there are some mainly coastal showers in the north and east. Northern parts weather inland this morning, with some snow likely on the Scottish hills, but most places will remain dry with sunny spells. Southern parts will have the best of the sunshine.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, we will speak to a shipping expert about what might have caused the collision between the two ships in the North Sea. And team designers take over Kensington Palace to put a modern twist on royal fashion for the last 200 years.
Here we go.
2, 1.
You, Sophie.
The big announcement.
The battle for number 10.
The drone is above us.
It is a chaotic scene.
They've asked us to leave.
It is a clear Labour landslide.
The car is covered in. Liberated but left in ruins.
A major incident has been declared.
That's when misinformation floods the zone.
It became clear the media weren't welcome.
These extraordinary images.
Must have taken years.
Who wants to talk about politics?
OK, stand by.
I wouldn't be asking it if I didn't think it was a relevant question.
The winner of the 2024 presidential election.
Quite extraordinary events.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. I've witnessed migration across Europe close up.
I'm James Matthews and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Free, wherever you get your news.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Seagal?
I'm Connor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent. Sky News, the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime. They don't care for that. Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometres away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up in a moment, we'll speak to a maritime investigator about the disaster in the North Sea. But first, a reminder of all the day's top stories.
Thank you, Wilfred. An oil tanker remains on fire off the coast of East Yorkshire, nearly a full day after colliding with a cargo ship in the North Sea. 36 people were rescued from the wreckage yesterday. One remains missing, with the search for them now called off. Meanwhile, there are serious environmental concerns following the incident off the coast of East Yorkshire. The combination of burning jet fuel and toxic chemicals are threatening both marine wildlife and birds in the area, as well as coastal and fishing communities. A British tourist on a backpacking holiday has been detained in the United States for the past 10 days. This is due to a mistake with her visa. A 28-year-old Rebecca Burke was trying to cross into the state of Washington when she was refused entry and taken to a detention facility. The government told this programme they're aware of her case and working with authorities in the US to secure her release. And there's been a slide in the Asian markets this morning after a sell-off on Wall Street over fears of a recession in the United States. Financial markets have been volatile on the back of rising trade tensions, coupled with signs of slowing economic growth in America. And talks between the US and Ukraine on ending the war will be held in Saudi Arabia today, with officials saying that Kyiv will propose a limited ceasefire. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky won't be at the talks, but he has met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And hours before the talks, Ukraine launched what appears to be its latest drone strike on Moscow since the war began. At least 2 people were killed and 8 others injured in the attack, which damaged apartment blocks and disrupted air travel across the Russian capital.
Let's get more now on the ship collision in the North Sea. Marine traffic websites indicate the container ship, the Solong, hit the Stena Immaculate while the oil tanker was anchored and stationary. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has been taking a look at exactly how the collision happened.
Thousands and thousands of miles of sea all around, yet 2 ships in a direct and fiery collision. Here's what we know about the ships and the moments up to and immediately after the crash. Now, the Coastguard said the alarm went at 9:48. It was sounded the site of the collision in the North Sea, 13 miles off the coast of Yorkshire. One of the ships, the Stena Immaculate, was anchored at the time, meaning it was stationary after sailing from Greece, according to ship tracking site Vessel Finder. The cargo vessel, Solong, was sailing from Grangemouth in Scotland to Rotterdam in the Netherlands at a speed of 16 knots, around 18 miles an hour, on a direct collision course with the Immaculate. Now, both ships have radar systems, which means they should have been able to detect each other at a distance of 24 miles out, experts have told us. And at 10 miles away, nautical miles away, the vessels should have been visible, although there were reports of fog and haze this morning.
If it's been put on autopilot and there's nobody on the bridge, which could happen, then it will just keep going straight on. It's, and that's what happens with a lot of the vessels. They have autopilot and it just steers the course. They don't deviate. They don't have any. There's no bends in the sea. It just goes straight. It just goes straight for miles, hundreds and hundreds of miles.
Now, So Long is a Portuguese-flagged cargo vessel, 140 metres long with a gross tonnage of 7,852. That's a measure of its volume. Put it in perspective, the tanker Stena Immaculate is, or was, much bigger, 183 metres long with a gross tonnage of nearly 30,000. Now, it was carrying jet fuel, and that ignited, so much so that it was visible from space. This is a satellite image taken at the same time with a huge plume of smoke clearly identifiable. At 10:20 a.m, the Coastguard tasked a number of lifeboats to support its response. Several lifeboats, a Coastguard rescue helicopter, were dispatched to the scene in the North Sea, along with a plane and nearby vessels with firefighting capability. Now, all that quick action meant the entire tanker crew was taken ashore safely. But the Marine Accident Investigation Branch has already sent investigators to Grimsby to understand why one ship apparently ploughed into another.
Let's bring in now Dr. Stavros Karamperidis, who's the head of Maritime Transport Research Group and a lecturer in maritime economics. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Karamperidis. How do you think this happened? I mean, Tom just explained a big part of it for us, but how rare is it when a ship is stationary for something like this, such a big disaster to take place?
Thank you very much, Wilford, for having me today. And I have to say that's extremely rare, what had happened. We have thousands of vessels navigating around the UK on a daily basis, and we have zero accidents. Don't forget that 96% of whatever we consume in the UK comes with vessels, so we're talking about those big vessels carrying fuel, other commodities, containers, and we don't have accidents. That is something very rare. To be honest, there's a lot of people trying to find out what had happened. And as you know, it's less than 24 hours since the accident happened. So we really have to follow the authorities and see what the authorities are saying, because everything is under investigation at the moment. And but it's extremely rare because the vessels are having systems on board. They have sonars, they have AES systems, which is automatically identifies the vessel's position real time. And there is always someone on watch on the bridge to see what is happening around. Yes, there were some reports there was fog, but still the systems were there to able to avoid that kind of collision.
So is it therefore your assumption, or is it too early to say that there was major human error involved, or are there other potential possibilities?
We can make a lot of speculations, and I think it shouldn't be a nice thing to do, a lot of speculations at the moment, but yes, human error could be one of the incidents. A mechanical failure could be also another case. The vessel, it was nearly 20 years old, the container vessels that hit the Stena Immaculate. So the only thing we can do at the moment is to speculate, but I think it's better to give a bit of space for the experts to come out and say what is going on. What we can definitely say for sure is that we have seen an amazing response from the UK authorities. We managed to see a very prompt response. Went straight to the scene. As you have seen, the damage was so big, so we was able to see from the satellite. But still, they managed with the firefighting to go there and rescue most of the people. I think during the night one person was missing, but I've just seen from your headlines that they've stopped the search and rescue for that person. So I don't know what is happening on that front. And our thoughts should be with the family and the relatives of the person who is missing at sea, because don't forget that the crew of those vessels are operating in harsh environments, and that is something that we really have to consider.
What is your assessment of the scale of the explosion and the fire that we saw?
That is something logical. You have to consider that the tanker was carrying jet fuel, so something that is extremely flammable. We had a vessel that had an impact with 16 knots. That means that approximately 30 kilometers or an hour. So it was with kind of a full speed, we can call it, that we had the collision. So that was kind of norm, because the fuel that the tanker was carrying was extremely flammable. So and that's why the firefighting, the guys that went there as first responders to control the fire, you will see that also I heard some reportings that also during the night the fire was going on. So and that made the overall response difficult because of the cargo that the tanker was carrying. And also we heard that some of the cargo that the container ship was carrying was extremely toxic. So that kind of mixture of those two made the overall response extremely difficult. But as you can see, it was very well. It was a very good response from the UK authorities.
Dr. Karamperidis, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure for having me.
Well, continue live updates, of course, from the Grimsby area near where that collision happened throughout the morning. Meanwhile, let's give you some live pictures from Moscow. Overnight, Ukraine launched what appears to be its largest drone strike on the Russian capital since the war began. At least 2 people were killed and 8 others injured in the attack, which damaged apartment blocks and disrupted air travel across the Russian capital. And these are some live pictures, it seems, of more central Moscow at the moment, as opposed to directly affected areas, and perhaps they're slightly affected given the tape that's there. It's an area near the apartment block. Looks like we'll come back to some of those live pictures for you later. Now, rarely seen outfits worn by Queen Elizabeth II, her sister Margaret and Princess Diana will be among the fashion treasures to go on display at Kensington Palace. The exhibition Dress Codes will showcase royal pieces from 1870 to the present day, alongside designs from a group of talented teenage producers. Our royal correspondent, Rhianna Mills, had a look inside.
You could call it a kind of palace takeover, or at least it's an invitation that Autumn and other teenagers haven't had before, to collaborate on one of this year's major palace exhibitions. Called Dress Codes, you'll find Princess Diana's outfits, dresses worn by Princess Margaret, the teenagers turning curators through these write-ups and videos to explore the symbolism of royal fashion and diplomatic dress, including making their own outfits, something rather different, inspired by a suit worn by the Duke of Windsor.
It speaks to what we know as a generation, and it gets our insight into what we find interesting. I think it's a way of bringing in a whole new audience.
Seeing things like Princess Diana's dresses and actually looking at what young Elizabeth and Margaret wore, it actually made it feel so much more real, like these were real people wearing it.
I was inspired by Queen Victoria's sense of style. She was a woman in the highest position of power, surrounded by men. I loved how her dress took up space and in some elements was quite masculine, and I was really interested by that power.
Power dressing and diplomacy certainly feel very on topic at the moment, and they always try to make sure that these exhibitions feel relevant. But if you come in here and see what the young producers have made, you can see how it's completely turned on its head the kind of things that are usually put on display alongside those priceless pieces. A couple of weeks ago, as a thank you, the King's Gallery at Kensington Palace was turned into a catwalk.
This is such a well-informed generation, so they were interested in the politics and the history, as well as the design of the objects that I care for every day, and that was wonderful.
These exhibitions are a big deal for drawing in thousands of visitors. You could say they've taken a risk. What's the point in preserving all this if it's not going to be relevant in the future? Rhiannon Mills, Sky News at Kensington Palace.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show this morning, the consequences of Sudan's brutal civil war 2 years on. We'll have that story coming next.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister.
My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight.
We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record.
Sky News, the full story first.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. Greenlanders are about to head to the polls at a time when US President Donald Trump has his eyes on the Danish territory. With growing calls for independence, the votes may prove crucial to the island's future. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has this report.
It is a place of huge potential, of natural wealth and beauty. But Greenland's only now just started to grab the world's attention. We all know why.
We need Greenland for national security and even international security, and we're working with everybody involved to try and get it. But we need it really for international world security, and I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it.
So which one's your boat?
But the US president's advances have not gone down well here among many. We join tour operators preparing for a tourist season like no other. They admit Donald Trump has been good for business.
It's free advertisement. So we are looking into a very busy season this year.
Donald Trump going out and talking about Greenland like it has never been mentioned before. It's on everybody's lips. Like everybody knows what Greenland is at the moment.
He's put you on the map.
Yeah, definitely, and that's a fact.
But the idea America could take over Greenland under President Trump only makes them angry.
I think that guy he's lunatic, he's mad. There's something wrong with his head.
As Greenlanders prepare to vote, the US president is continuing his meddling. Donald Trump's direct interference is making this a highly charged election. When Greenlanders go to the polls, they may end up returning the biggest vote yet in favour of independence from Denmark.
Trump wants to buy my country, Greenland.
Greenland's biggest social media influencer is running for office. Kupanak Olsen says Donald Trump's making it more likely Greenland goes its own way, not Denmark's or America's.
Because everyone in Greenland now have to have an opinion whether we should stay under Denmark or whether we should become a state under the United States or whether we should become independent. It's making us aware, hey, we are more worth than what the Danish people have been telling us the last 300 years. Maybe we can stand on our own feet.
With messages like this from the American president on the eve of the election, offering Greenland investment worth billions of dollars to make you rich, feelings are running high here. What kind of message do you hope the election sends to Donald Trump?
I hope it sends a clear message to him that we are not for sale. We don't want to be Americans.
No, we don't want to be Danes. We want to be Greenlanders, and we want our own independence in the future, and we want to build our own country by ourselves, not with his help.
There's no doubt Donald Trump's energised Greenland's politics. But how much they're shifting in his direction will only become clear when the voting is over. Dominic Waghorn in Nuuk, Greenland.
Well, next month will mark 2 years since civil war broke out in Sudan between two opposing factions of the country's army. According to the UNHCR, the fighting has displaced over 800,000 people in the country and a further 200,000 refugees. Sky News has been on the ground since the war began, with our reporter Yusra Elbagir covering the story from a very personal perspective. Before we speak to our next guest, let's take a look at some of the devastation that's been unfolding.
You never think war will come to you, to your hometown, to your neighborhood. Then it does. And all you can do is witness the tragedy and pray for it to end. But the reality is that it's always happening in someone's home, to someone's family and friends. This time, it was mine.
This place is full of memories, not just for me, but for everyone I know. It is the most iconic marketplace in the capital, if not the country. And it used to just be bustling, full of life. You could get anything that you wanted here. You could get antiques, you could get silver, you could get leather. And now this is what it is. It's just barren. And the shops were clearly looted long before this became a battleground. And now the destruction is complete.
When the war in the news is the war at home, every event feels personal. An intimate reminder for millions of people that the home of our memories, of our loved ones, of our friends, is slowly ceasing to exist.
Just a small taste of Yusra's reporting there from Sudan over the last couple of years. Well, Mohammed Reefat joins me now. He's the Chief of Mission for the International Organisation for Migration in Sudan, in London briefly, and joins us in studio this morning. Mohammed, thanks for coming in. I guess we got a snapshot there. There had been, I guess, over the last couple of months, some hope that the situation was improving, that the civil war was nearing an end. What's the latest on your perspective?
Unfortunately, the latest is that 1 out of every 4 Sudanese is out of their home, which means that we have almost 11.6 million Sudanese who are displaced inside Sudan, in addition to more than 3 million outside of Sudan. What does this mean in actual life? It means that if you are a family who used to have a house in Khartoum, you have been displaced from your home once or twice to several places. Your girls have been attacked with rape, maybe. You cannot find enough water, you have to flee the country, and it has been such a horrible protection crisis so far.
Is it getting worse? Is there an end in sight or not?
Unfortunately, you cannot see an end in sight. It's getting more and more complicated because now we see more crises on top of the war. We see floods, we see cholera outbreak, malaria outbreak, and we see shrinking in the funding and access to those who need help.
Talk to me about that. What scale of international support has been given over the last couple of years, and what are your hopes for it continuing or improving from here?
There has been a lot of efforts that has been made, but definitely we cannot reach everyone. With the resources we have, we were able to help more than 3 million people over the last couple of years since the war erupted. But there are millions others that we cannot reach and we cannot help because of either access issues or the shortage of funds that the whole humanitarian community is facing now.
Clearly, whether it's the US or the UK, aid funding is being focused on, is being cut in many circumstances. Is that a direct worry for millions of people in Sudan?
It is. Thanks to all the governments that have been supporting Sudan. This is definitely an effort that publics and governments have been doing a lot. But let me focus that this donations that have been given to the UN and the humanitarian system has enabled the infrastructure for us to report on this crisis and to be able to explain the needs day by day. But also there are many other sources of funding that we have been reaching that without the government donation, we cannot actually enable the system that will protect people on the ground. I think we call for more, and definitely this year, at least for IOM, we are calling for $250 million at least that will enable us to save lives in this crisis.
Is that more than you got last year? Are you hopeful that you'll get it, or are the prospects, given the cuts to international aid, are the prospects of receiving that very low?
We are diversifying our funding. There has been a lot of promises that's been made. We are working on them. We are receiving only 6% of what we have asked for, but we are still hopeful that the world will not stop here.
Just as we start to wrap up, remind our viewers of the scale of the numbers, because I guess here on Sky News, because of Yusra's reporting, we have tried to shine a spotlight on it, but the scale, I think, shocks people every time they hear the numbers.
So Sudan, before the war, used to have more than 2 million people internally displaced, but after the war, it's ended up being 9.6 more. So I would say a city like London, the whole population of a city like London has been displaced. It means that 1 out of every 4 Sudanese is displaced. It means half of those population in Sudan cannot find enough food. More than 30 million people in Sudan are in desperate need for humanitarian aid.
Well, Mohammed, we thank you for stopping by this morning. Thanks so much, and good luck, Mohammed Reefat, the Chief of Mission at the International Organisation for Displacement in Sudan. We're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. After that break, we'll have all of the day's top stories. We'll be back live in Grimsby to get an update on the recovery efforts relating to that maritime disaster, the biggest maritime collision in recent history in the UK. We'll also be speaking to the Conservatives to get their response to all of the day's news. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock on today's show. The worst maritime collision in recent British history. 36 crew members rescued, but one is still missing.
Plus, the government tells this programme they'll change the law to stop the Sentencing Council giving preferential treatment to minority groups.
And fancy fish fingers for tea. Well, we'll be telling you a bit later why it could make your child kinder.
It's Tuesday, March the 11th. Your headlines. Fires are still burning on two ships that collided in the North Sea. Environmentalists warn of an ecological catastrophe.
Here in Grimsby, the search for the last remaining crew member has now been called off as the focus moves to understanding how such a serious collision was able to happen.
And I'm on the Cleethorpes coastline where environmental groups fear an environmental catastrophe if oil and toxic chemicals come into contact with the thousands of birds and seals that live along this shore.
Also ahead, a British tourist on a backpacking trip around North America is detained by US authorities for 10 days over a visa issue. We'll speak to her dad. And two people are killed and Moscow's biggest airport suspends flights after a Ukrainian drone attack as peace talks get underway in Saudi Arabia. And we await the opening of European equity markets after the biggest sell-off in Wall Street in 2.5 years. Very good morning to you. There are growing fears of an environmental catastrophe in the North Sea. An oil tanker that was carrying jet fuel and a cargo vessel containing toxic chemicals is still blazing after they collided off the Yorkshire coast. 36 crew members were rescued from the wreckage, but the search was called off for the final missing worker last night. Now the investigation into what happened begins. This was the latest update from the Coastguard.
36 crew members were taken safely to shore. One crew member of the Solong remains unaccounted for, and after an extensive search for the missing crewmen, sadly they have not been found and the search has been terminated. The two vessels remain on fire and Coastguard aircraft are monitoring the situation. An assessment of any required counter-pollution response is being carried out by the Maritime and Coastguard Agency, and the Secretary of State's representative for Maritime Salvage and Intervention is working with the salvors and insurance companies.
We're joined now from our North of England correspondent Katie Barnfield and our science correspondent Thomas Moore. Katie, to you first, and that sad news that the search for the last remaining crew member has been called off.
Yes, indeed. Well, the Coastguard called off that search just before 10 o'clock last night for the last remaining crew member who remained unaccounted for. We know that they were a crew member of the Solong, the cargo ship that hit the oil tanker, the Stennet Immaculate, yesterday morning. All the other crew members from both ships are safe and accounted for. We understand that one person was treated in hospital. Anybody else who needed treatment was seen here at the port of Grimsby by ambulance crews, but no other serious injuries were reported. As the Coastguard was saying there, the fire is still burning. This morning, nearly 24 hours after the initial impact on the Stennet Immaculate, that oil tanker that was carrying 220,000 barrels of jet fuel for the US Navy at the time of the impact. All vessels this morning here in Grimsby are being held in port, not allowed to go out to sea at the moment. There is still an exclusion zone around the site of the impact, and the focus now the search and rescue operation is over moves to two things. Number one, trying to contain the environmental impact of this collision and the resulting oil spill. We also know that the Solong was carrying sodium cyanide, which is, of course, a toxic chemical. And number two, trying to find out exactly how this was able to happen. The Marine Accident Investigation Branch has started a preliminary investigation, but it's ultimately the flag states of both of these vessels, the US and Portugal, that will ultimately be responsible for investigating exactly what went on.
Katie, thanks for that perspective. Let's bring in Thomas, our science correspondent. Thomas, that word has been used a lot over the last 24 hours, fears of a catastrophe on the environmental front. Talk us through why and what chemicals in particular are going to be in the water now.
Well, it's a matter of how much and what is in the water, actually, and that will determine the fate of the wildlife that lives along this coastline. So first of all, you've got the jet fuel. Now, much of that will probably burn off or it will evaporate if it does reach the water. It's a very light oil. More of a concern is the heavy fuel oil that would have powered these ships. That's much thicker, tarry. That's the stuff that really clogs the fur and the feathers of marine mammals and birds. But there's also this sodium cyanide. In contact with water, that reacts and creates hydrogen cyanide gas, and that's extremely toxic to all living creatures. But that will be a concern. But the question too over what else is on board that cargo ship, and that there is now an effort to go through the manifest to look at the cargo to see if there are other really toxic chemicals that might be in containers that may well have gone over the side. The point is, we don't know. That fire has been too intense for people to work out the real threat to the wildlife, the thousands of seals that have been pupping along these shores in recent months, and the 500,000 gannets, kittiwakes, puffins that are gathering on Benton Cliffs just up the coast. It's the start of their nesting season, and they'll be feeding out in that deep water, potentially coming into contact with these chemicals.
Thomas, is there a concern for the people of Grimsby and Cleethorpes and the surrounding area as well, or not?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So Bridlington has the largest lobster fishery in Europe. They are extremely concerned about the potential impact on their livelihoods. Now, they too have been kept inshore. Today, they aren't able to go and lift their pots. While those pots are on the sea bottom and the oil is on the surface, everything's okay. They can wait for the oil to dissipate, then go out and continue with their work. But if things do begin to mix in with the water column, that could create long-term problems, and that is the concern, that this might have a longer-term impact.
Great stuff, Thomas. Thanks so much for that, and to Katie as well. Now, Ukraine has launched what appears to be the largest drone attack on Moscow since the war began, killing at least 3 people and forcing the closure of airports in the Russian capital. The attack comes just hours ahead of crucial peace talks between Ukraine and US officials in Saudi Arabia, aimed, of course, at ending the war. Our international correspondent Alex Rossi is in Jeddah for us. Ivor Bennett is in Moscow. A very good morning to you both. Ivor, to you, first of all, what happened overnight?
Well, as you say, Wilf, this appears to be the biggest drone attack so far launched by Ukraine on the Russian capital in the last 3 years. And it started at 4 a.m. Several waves of attacks, drone attacks came across the border, and they continued into the morning rush hour here. So a significant attack indeed. According to the authorities here, they shot down 337 drones in total over Russian territory, with at least 91 of those being downed over the Moscow region, which is the area that surrounds the capital. None of them made it through to the city centre here itself because of the various air defence systems that have been constructed in the last 3 years to shield Moscow. But there has been damage and casualties caused in the outskirts as a result of these drones being shot down. So the latest we're hearing from the governor of Moscow region is that at least 3 people have been killed, at least 7 people injured, several apartment buildings have been damaged, some residents have been evacuated from their buildings in some places. For several hours this morning, all 4 of Moscow's major airports were shut due to the threat of drones. We understand those restrictions have recently been lifted, but still widespread damage and widespread disruption. And it feels like Ukraine was trying to send a message here, a message to Russia and a message to the US, saying that it's not just Russia that holds all the cards. We still hold some cards too, and we're still capable of causing attacks, causing problems for Russia. So if we're forced to make concessions, then Moscow should be too.
Ivor, great stuff. Thanks so much. Let's go out to Alex now. Alex, these peace talks that are taking place, who exactly is taking part for each side, and what hopes are there for serious progress?
Well, certainly when the delegates arrived, they appeared fairly optimistic. We're expecting the talks to get underway relatively soon. It's not at a presidential level. Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukrainian president, has left. He did arrive here. He had meetings with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, but he won't be taking part. It's at a lower level. Ukraine is represented by a foreign minister, defense minister, and the president's chief of staff. The American delegation is being led by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff is also in town, as well as the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz. So a fairly high-level meeting. And from the Americans' point of view, they want to see what kind of concessions the Ukrainians are prepared to make when it comes to peace. Remember that very disastrous diplomatic spat in the Oval Office. That they're kind of seeking to see if the Ukrainians have moved at all. Now, privately, American officials have been saying they don't want to hear about 2014 borders. They don't want to hear about 2022 borders. These, of course, referring to 2014 when the Russians annexed Crimea, 2022 when they launched the large scale of invasion. They now have taken huge chunks of land in Russia. So they want to see movement on that dial. And it looks like the Ukrainians are going to have to make some fairly painful concessions. But the hope is when these talks finish, we'll see and understand what the shape of a ceasefire deal will look like going forwards.
Alex, great stuff. And to Ivor as well, thank you very much.
A British tourist on a backpacking holiday has been detained in the US for the past 10 days over a mistake with her visa. Sadia joins us on set now. What are the details and the background to this case?
So Rebecca Burke is a 28-year-old graphic artist from the UK. She was on a 4-month backpacking tour of North America. She'd entered the US earlier this year. She spent some time in New York and then in Oregon. When she was staying in Oregon, she stayed with a family. And essentially, her setup there was that she would stay with them. They'd give her a place to stay. And in exchange, she would do some household tasks for them. And then she tried to get into Canada. And as she was trying to enter Canada, she was stopped, told to turn back and sort out her paperwork in the US. And on her re-entry to the US, she was detained, and she has been detained for the last 10 days now. Her family say that she is isolated, that she's in an orange jumpsuit. They are worried about her, saying that she is being kept in horrendous conditions. They didn't think of her as an immigrant. They think of her as a tourist, although US Customs and Border Protection's rules do say that if you go there, you're not allowed to work, and that includes in exchange for any board or accommodation. And all of this, of course, comes in the backdrop of the US crackdown on immigration, particularly along that US-Canada border, where that has been a key issue. Clearly, both countries now taking this very, very seriously. And, you know, what with the backlog, we could see a bit of a delay in them dealing with her case. Her family really want to remind people that if you're travelling to the US, you should really, really check your visa, double, triple check your visa before you go.
Let's just quickly listen to some of the comments from the government earlier today on this.
So I'm limited in what I can say on this case, but we are aware of that UK national who has been detained in the United States. We're providing support. We're in contact with the local authorities in the area, but that's about all I can say at this stage on that particular case.
Is it more important to maintain good relations with Donald Trump?
I don't think that's an issue in this particular case. I think the individual is detained for very specific reasons. We're providing support to them and are in contact with the local authorities in the area.
That was Matthew Pennycook last hour on this story, and we're going to be talking to Becky's dad, Paul, at 8:30 in about 15 minutes' time. Sadia, great stuff. Thanks so much.
Thank you. OK, let's take you through some of the day's other stories. And the Prime Minister is facing his first big election test since the general election after Mike Amesbury announced he would quit Parliament following his conviction for assault. Amesbury admitted to punching a man in Cheshire in October and was given a 10-week suspended sentence. The move has triggered a by-election in Runcorn and Helsby. A Liberal Democrat MP has appealed the High Court's judgment on plans that would see an additional £3 billion loan added to Thames Water's existing debt of over £16 billion. Charlie Maynard is advocating for the company to go into special administration to fix its finances.
This move is not benefiting customers at all. So we've got this enormous debt mountain, and what they're proposing doing is adding even more debt on top of that. And Meanwhile, every customer in the Thames Water catchment area has just got a 35% increase on their bill. The finance of this company are a complete mess.
And a new study suggests children who regularly eat fish could be more sociable and kinder to their friends. Researchers from the University of Bristol say it's a result of the nutrients in seafood having a positive effect on brain development and cognitive function. The long-term study found children who ate no fish were more likely to misbehave.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. Now, Asian markets did take a slide earlier this morning before then recovering slightly. Of course, European markets themselves have also just opened. Let's have a quick look at what they're doing so far, slightly lower. Let's go live to our Beijing and Asia correspondent, Nicole Johnson. Nicole, clearly markets have had a torrid couple of days, most notably in the US yesterday. The tech-heavy NASDAQ was down 4%. It was his worst individual trading day for 2.5 years. A lot of this comes down to trade and I guess the pain that the US leadership is willing to take in the short term, and that's what's really affecting market sentiment.
Indeed, and it goes to show just how quickly it can spread. We can see that the Asian markets, as you said, they took a hit. They have rallied since, but Japan, South Korea, Australia, all down around 1%. And certainly in the case of Japan and Australia, they are scrambling right now with the US administration, trying to get an exemption from those 25% steel and aluminium tariffs, which are due to take effect tomorrow. So this is why the world is reeling right now, in Asia as well. Reciprocal tariffs could be introduced in April. Here in China, they've had their tariffs doubled to 20%. People don't know whether the tariffs will stay on or off. Exporters are having to try and deal with all of this uncertainty. They know here in China just how important the US market is. Across Asia, the United States market is incredibly important, and their goods could be just about to become even more expensive. So that's why we're starting to see some pretty wild swings on the market, even though it did end up recovering by the end of the day.
God Johnson, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. And at the moment, European markets actually mixed, which is, all things considered, following that close on Wall Street, not too bad. Now, the chairman of the Sentencing Council has criticised the Justice Secretary for comments over sentencing guidelines, saying they should not be dictated by ministers. Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood had raised concerns over new guidance that allowed judges to consider a defendant's ethnicity when deciding whether to send them to prison or not. Mari's here with all of the details. Mari, this is quite a sort of explosive reply from the chair of the Sentencing Council in reply to the Justice Secretary.
Exactly. So rewind for a second to last week. We were talking about this because the Sentencing Council were giving those guidelines out. The Justice Secretary was not happy about it, so she wrote to them. Then they've written back, and that's exactly what you've outlined. Now, the difficulty is, in their response, they say, I do not accept the premise of your objection. So straight off the bat, they are not accepting what the government is saying, and they are not changing their guidelines. They are independent, so there is no legal pressure on them to change it. They can say no if they want to. And they also then say, at no stage did the Lord Chancellor's representative express any concern or reservation. Now, MOJ sources say that that was a civil servant, and we'll get to that in a minute when we play the clip with yourself and Matthew Pennycook and the back and forth there. But the difficulty appears to be that the government wasn't aware this entire time since coming into government that this was happening, despite several meetings going on, despite the minutes being available, despite a representative, albeit a civil service, being there. And now we've got a situation where the government is insisting that they are willing to change the law on this if the Sentencing Council doesn't budge. Matthew Pennycook has said there's going to be a meeting this week between the Lord Chancellor, Justice Secretary, and the Sentencing Council to try and make that case. But if they say no, there's going to end up being a bit of a legal battle with the judiciary. But
I mean, the headline, I guess, from hints last week, but conversation explicit this morning, and the letter is that the Sentencing Council is not going to budge in the short term, and the government is willing to legislate to force them to budge. Is that fair?
That sounds fair. And to me, the most interesting thing is to be a fly on the wall in that meeting this week. What is going to be said in that meeting this week? Are we going to be given a readout or any information about that? And if the Sentencing Council dig their heels in, then essentially there is nothing the government can do.
All right, great stuff. As always, we're going to listen to some of the exchange with Matthew Pennycook, the government, this morning, and then we'll get a response from the Conservatives.
I'm not going to speak for the individual civil servants who are in whatever particular meeting.
So you're blaming it on the civil servants?
Not blaming it on civil servants, but I think the Justice Secretary could not have been clearer about her view and the government's view.
We get that, but Robert Jenrick brought this to her attention. She wasn't aware of this until then.
Well, Robert Jenrick, if you...
That's fine.
Correct me if I'm wrong, was a government minister at the time that...
and I've held him to account about that, and I will hold the Conservatives to account about that. But you're blaming a civil service by implication.
I'm not blaming a civil service.
OK, so who's responsible for it?
I don't know who was in what meetings, is what I'm saying, but
But there's 15 meetings and 15 sets of minutes where it can be referred to, of which 8 months' worth were whilst you're in government. Is it fair to say that you're asleep at the wheel, to not notice this until...
I don't think it is fair. I'd say I don't know what meetings took place with what individuals were in the room, but the Justice Secretary could not have been clearer about her view and the government's position on this issue, and what we want the Sentencing Council to do in terms of rethinking and rescinding that guidance, and the steps we are prepared to take if they don't think again.
Matthew Pennycook from the government last hour. Joining me now, as you can see, is Andrew Griffith, the Shadow Secretary of State for Business. Good to see you.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. Forget the background of how we got here on this sentencing spat. Are you in agreement with the government here and what Matthew Pennycook said, that in order to force the Sentencing Council to change, it's worth legislating?
Yes, 100%. The outcome that we want, blind justice, is something that's long been established as part of British law. You've actually got the government and the official opposition both saying that, and we see this in many other domains as well, by the way, that independent arm's-length bodies have gone a step too far. Now, I don't want to live in a world where ministers are deciding any individual sentence, to be clear, but overall policy, the balance between rights, the values that we have in society, is the right domain of elected politicians. And frankly, I want that to be restored. If it needs legislation, then we will support that. But it should never have got to this.
On the point of it should never have got to this, you know, we are pushing on the government this morning and last week on the sort of 7 or 8 months they've had in power to intervene and failed to do so. The letter from the Sentencing Council chair says, overall, the guideline was discussed at 15 council meetings between July 2022 and January 2025. So your party was also asleep at the wheel on this.
Well, look, government's big and complex as a human organisation. It's not clear to me the balance between ministers and the very large number, too large number of civil servants involved. So unless you or I were in that meeting, it's very hard to tell exactly what was discussed.
But this is extraordinary. Both of you are blaming the civil service.
No, well, I'm not blaming any individual civil servants, to be clear. I never do that.
But you're blaming the civil service.
I'm blaming a system that needs fundamental reform, a system of arm's-length bodies that essentially go federal, a system whereby officials rather than ministers, and where Parliament doesn't have its say on some really important issues. So I don't think there's anything controversial about saying that we want, as a society, to be governed by our democratically elected politicians. I'd prefer they were Conservative, but in this case, you've got to respect the will of the British people, and the current Justice Secretary is at one in saying that these are decisions that ultimately should be made in our democratically elected Parliament, not by unelected. I didn't elect anybody for the Sentencing Council, and I don't think you did.
No, but it was introduced by a law passed by a democratic parliament in 2009, and you had 14 years to alter that if you'd so desired. But what is controversial, I think, is blaming the civil service when your own minister, Gareth Bacon, wrote a letter to the Sentencing Council in February 2024 where he welcomed the draft of these measures. I mean, both you and Matthew Pennycook are blaming the civil service for this. You're ministers. You can take responsibility.
Well, let's be clear, I'm blaming an organisation that one way or another, and we'll all need to get to the bottom of it, one way or another, along many, many drafts and many, many meetings, something that was no doubt well-intentioned, the law that government passes the most is always the law of good intentions. Somewhere along the line, there's been some overreach. And I'm not, forgive me, but I'm not able to forensically go through where that draft changed from being something that would potentially have been deemed acceptable to when it was unacceptable. I think one of the things that everyone should do from this is learn exactly what happened, who was in which meeting and when, what drafts were circulated. But at the core principle, and I'm not the Shadow Justice Secretary or even a lawyer, but the core principle that we want our laws and our values in the society to be litigated for by Parliament and elected ministers rather than by arm's-length bodies who are not elected and too often not accountable is a general principle that I would support on planning matters, on employment rights, which we're talking about today, and in this particular case.
Let's get to the employment rights in a second, but since you mentioned planning matters, do you broadly support what the government is trying to do on planning?
I want to see the detail. You'd expect me to say that. But directionally, we do need more growth in this country. It's why I regret the cancellation of many of the ready plans that the previous government had for growth. And if this government is serious about attacking every single stage of the planning process, not just picking on the often the very shortest part, which is democratic local communities deciding for themselves, that I support, but the very elongated process of assembling often thousands of lever arch pages of reports ahead of that democratic decision, and then the ability for people to spend years, sometimes decades, after that decision, trying to relitigate it through the courts using judicial review. If they're serious about tackling every part of that and not just picking a fight with local democratic elected councils, who I think are not the biggest challenge in this process, then we'll look at those proposals with great seriousness.
Let's get on to the Employment Rights Bill. Sorry to be delayed to get to it. I mean, it does boost rights for workers. You think that is at a unnecessary cost that could cause unemployment. What scale of unemployment are we talking about that you think this bill would cause?
Well, not just me, by the way, every single business group, including the CBI. It's not so much about workers' rights. Of course we must have workers' rights, and this country's long had a very well-established system of balance between the rights of workers and the flexibility for employees. This is something that Tony Blair, Gordon Brown never sought to change in office, so this is going back literally 40 years or so, back to 1970 style. A lot of it is about the rights of trade unions, not workers themselves. And look, who's going to really be hurt by this? Well, business for sure, because even the government's own impact assessment says it'll be cost £5 billion a year. That's huge at a time the economy's in a per capita recession. But what's really going to happen is those workers who aren't going to get the chance. Young people, greater unemployment for young people. The Prime Minister last night was talking about the 9 million people of working age who are not in work and on benefits. How are we going to get them back to work if all we're doing is putting more red tape on the very employers who might otherwise take a chance on them?
Andrew Griffiths, I'm afraid we're out of time, but we thank you very much for joining us. Good to see you. We're going to have a look at the weather now.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A developing northerly wind will make it much colder over the next few days, with wintry showers and widespread overnight frosts. It's mostly fine, but cold now, with an extensive frost over northern and central parts, but there are some mainly coastal showers in the north and east. Northern parts will see the showers spreading further inland this morning, with some snow likely on the Scottish hills, but most places will remain dry and sunny. Southern parts will have the best of the sunshine.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we speak to the father of a British tourist detained in the United States over a mix-up over their visa. Plus, we'll hear from the family of a little boy who lost his life to cancer about the need for more financial aid for parental carers.
Here we go.
2, 1.
You, Sophie.
The big announcement.
The battle for number 10.
The drone is above us.
It is a chaotic scene.
They've asked us to leave.
It is a clear Labour landslide.
The car is covered in.
Liberated but left in ruins.
A major incident has been declared.
That's when misinformation floods the zone.
It became clear the media weren't welcome.
These extraordinary images
Must have taken years.
Who wants to talk about politics?
OK, stand by.
I wouldn't be asking it if I didn't think it was a relevant question.
The winner of the 2024 presidential election.
Quite extraordinary events.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. I've witnessed migration across Europe close up.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Free, wherever you get your news.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Seagal?
I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent. Sky News, the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime. They don't care for that. Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away.
So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Sky News get the full story first. Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, coming up in a moment, we'll be speaking to the father of a British tourist detained by US immigration over a mix-up about her visa. That's moments away. But first, a reminder of all today's top stories with Leah.
Thank you, Wilfred. An oil tanker remains on fire off the coast of East Yorkshire. Nearly a full day after colliding with a cargo ship in the North Sea, 36 people were rescued from the wreckage yesterday. One remains missing, with the search for them now called off. Meanwhile, there are serious environmental concerns following the incident off the coast of East Yorkshire. The combination of burning jet fuel and toxic chemicals are threatening both marine wildlife and birds in the area, as well as coastal and fishing communities. Talking about this very soon, a British tourist on a backpacking holiday has been detained in the United States for the past 10 days due to a mistake with her visa. 28-year-old Rebecca Burke was trying to cross into the state of Washington when she was refused entry and taken to a detention facility. Well, the government told this programme they were aware of the case and are working with authorities in the US to secure her release. Talks between the US and Ukraine on ending the war will be held in Saudi Arabia today, with officials saying that Kyiv will propose a limited ceasefire. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky won't be at the talks, but he has met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Hours before the talks, Ukraine launched what appears to be its largest drone strike on Moscow since the war began. At least 3 people were killed and 8 others injured in the attack, which damaged apartment blocks and disrupted air travel across the Russian capital. And there's been a slide in the Asian markets this morning after a sell-off on Wall Street over fears of a recession in the United States. Financial markets have been volatile on the back of rising trade tensions, coupled with signs of slowing economic growth in America.
Let's get more now on the British tourist who's been detained in the United States. 28-year-old Rebecca Burke from Monmouthshire was trying to enter the US state of Washington when she was refused entry. She'd been planning to stay with their host family there and work for them in exchange for food and board. US immigration say that she should have entered on a work visa, not a tourist visa. We can now speak to her father, Paul Burke. Paul, thanks so much for joining us. Just so we can get it all clear, I don't think the intro quite got it right. She'd been in the US for a while, went to leave the US and go into Canada, who rejected her entry and sent her back to the US, at which point she was detained. Is that correct?
Yeah, she'd been planning this trip for a long time, did lots of research ahead of it. She left in January for what was meant to be a once-in-a-lifetime trip, travelling, hiking, sightseeing throughout North America. Initially, my wife and I were quite nervous that our daughter, a young woman, was going solo travelling. But when she told us it was the USA and Canada, we thought, well, of all the countries in the world, probably two of the safest countries for a British tourist to go to would be USA and Canada. But what was meant to be life-changing for her, she'd planned it to really expand her horizons and enjoy the natural countryside in USA and Canada. It's turned into a nightmare for her, for us, and what's happened just seems so totally unbelievable. Due to a visa mix-up, a paperwork issue, she was detained by US immigration, ICE, and unbelievably taken by Homeland Security in handcuffs to a large detention center in Tacoma, Washington. She's been there now for 14 days, and the conditions that she's in, again, it's another description of something that your viewers and wife and I, no one we tell, can believe.
So can you expand on that a little bit for us? When was the last time you spoke to her, and what was she saying about her state and the conditions she's in?
Well, we speak to her every day. Nobody can contact her, but she's allowed to make phone calls out from a prison iPad, and the iPad is shared between 14 other women in the detention centre. But the conditions, when she arrived there, she had all her possessions confiscated. She had to swap her clothes for a prison jumpsuit. She is a vegan, and they obviously don't know how to deal with vegans, so she's been fed cold rice and potatoes and mushy beans for 14 days. Yesterday, we spoke to her last night, and she said she had to go and see the medic because she's got digestive problems. And I think if you or I had cold rice and potatoes and mushy beans for 14 days, we'd probably have digestive problems. When people, we've got a few very kind people who have offered to go and visit her in the state of Washington, and they have said that when they visit, she's behind a glass screen and they have to talk via a telephone.
And
have you been given the British tourist is being held in such conditions?
Have you been given any guidance, Paul? Any updates on the process from here, and any help from the British government?
Generally, it's been quite unclear, but I've got to say the help I've had from our local MP in Monmouthshire, Catherine Fuchs, and her office, her team, they responded almost immediately. About 12 days ago, I contacted them. They responded immediately, and they've been communicating with me ever since. Catherine Fuchs has escalated this to David Lammy's desk, and she's trying to get it onto Peter Mandelson's desk as our ambassador in the US. So really doing everything they can. The British consulate in London and the British consulate in San Francisco have been very communicative. So lots of dialogue, speaking to them or emailing them every day. However, it doesn't seem to matter what level it gets to. the US system, the system that ICE, the processes and procedures of ICE, they're just going to carry on and follow their process. So it doesn't seem like anyone can influence them. I do have one slight bit of positive news from our call with Becky at 10 o'clock last night. She said that for the first time in many days, an ICE officer visited her and he said, "Oh, your case is getting a high profile. I'm going to have to put you up the priority list." So I think all the media and political pressure and the British consulate, I think together it's now raised the profile such that she's being put up the priority list. But she was told by the ICE officer it could still be another 10 days. Why can it not be tomorrow?
Do you get the feeling...
We just want her home.
Do you get the feeling that a lot of this is caused by the recent change in government in the United States?
I really don't know. One thing I do know, I know there have been policy changes around immigration, so I absolutely know for sure that the change in immigration policy and the crackdown has caused people to be swept up in the system that would normally not. Basically, tourists are being swept up. But what makes it worse for the tourists which are being swept up is that the detention centres are being filled because of the crackdown. Becky told us a few days ago that her detention centre, which is a 1,500 women detention centre, it will be at capacity next week. So I think part of the reason why this has been such a slow, really slow process is because of the workload that ICE are having to go through. So I can't really, I can't really get angry at the ICE organisation. They're just being totally overloaded with cases. So if you're an innocent tourist, you're still at the back of a long queue of paperwork for ICE to go through.
It's good to hear, Paul, that your call last night with her had that positive detail in it. Despite that, are you worried for her safety at the moment?
We are worried. We want her home. We wanted her home 14 days ago, and it's, I think, mainly because of the diet she's on. She's not getting any fruit. She's just having cold rice and potatoes. For some strange reason, the vegan tray of food doesn't have fruit, but the women next to her who are not vegans are getting a piece of fruit alongside the burger. Becky asked the person serving, "Why is this happening? Can I have some fruit, please?" And she said, "Oh, fruit is not part of the vegan menu." I know you will. Your jaw will drop when you hear me saying that. We can't believe it either. So she's actually trading. She's an artist, graphic artist, and she's trading portraits of the other women and the other women's kids who they obviously can't see. She's drawing portraits in return for an orange or some other food from the other women. And so in terms of how the other women are treating her, it really is like a band of sisters together. They're all really looking after each other well. So that did take our concerns down one level, but at least all the women she's in there with, they're all trying to help each other and support each other, which is, I suppose, one good thing.
And Paul, just finally, I asked this because I wonder if you have a message to other people here who might be about to travel to the US. I hope this question comes across in the right way. But I guess maybe you wouldn't acknowledge this, but maybe there was some small snafu that Becky made in terms of not quite having the right paperwork, or whether simple house chores did cross a line in the interpretation of the US rules. But I guess to sum that up, is there a message to British travellers that might be going there that you'd have for them?
It's one reason why I've agreed to all these interviews. I absolutely do not want any other families to go through what my wife and I have been through. For us, it's been a nightmare we've not been able to escape from, and we're not really living our life. We're just watching ourselves go through the motions. My advice is that if you're going to the US or Canada for more than just a regular holiday, for an extended period, check and double check the visa requirements. And because of our experience with Becky, I would actually say if it's more of an extended holiday, write to the embassy in the UK, so the USA embassy, the Canadian embassy, and ask them, is this the right visa for me to do these activities? And get them to send a letter and carry the letter with you. Really don't want anyone else to go through the same nightmare.
Paul, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and do please keep us updated and send Becky our best. Paul Burke joining us just there. Leah and Sadia are with me on set. We were talking about this story all through the morning, and God, I thought it was 10 days. It's 14 days, and it was really interesting hearing Paul kind of contextualise the sort of state of play and the prospect, Sadia, of another 10 days potentially as well.
Exactly. And on the one hand, we get an insight, quite a close-up look at what the US immigration system looks like. He talked about the conditions that Becky is being kept in. He talked about the food, the camaraderie amongst other people who are with her, and the warning that she said to him that detention centre, which is for 1,500 people, could reach capacity next week. So an insight into that. But also at the heart of this is a family very worried about their daughter who travelled on what they thought was a simple holiday, a backpacking holiday, and who has ended up in detention for such a long time. And I think it exposes sort of the complexities of what we might think as a simple holiday to somewhere like the US, an English-speaking country where, you know, people go on holiday all the time. But actually, if you look at some of their intricate rules around what you can and cannot do, maybe you'll think twice about something like this before. And I just have to say we have reached out to both the Immigration, Customs Enforcement and the Customs and Border Regulation teams to try and get any comment from them as well.
Yeah, and just on a personal level, really, you can really feel for Paul, you know, daughter on this solo travel trip of a lifetime. And just looking at her Instagram now, actually, she posted a reel about heading out and volunteering. And that's what Sadia was getting to, highlighting the fact if you are volunteering, if you are working, even studying, you need to get the correct visa. And that's very hard for Paul, obviously, to take in right now. But it's one of those issues that I think will affect lots of people travelling.
Yeah, well, our thanks again to Paul Burke for joining us on that interview, reflecting on his daughter Becky's detainment in the US for the last 14 days. So we're going to take a quick break here on The Breakfast Show. When we come back, we'll speak to the father of a little boy who lost his life to cancer, about the need for more financial help for parents.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirmed that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Loch Ness. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. Sky News, the full story first.
We're going to do this 100 times every day for the next 3 months.
Why have we agreed to this?
Raises many questions about many things.
Actually seeing people impacted, she was so upset.
It was powerful. They kind of couldn't believe they were being berated here.
Very much on my terms, I think was the subtext. News happens fast around Donald Trump.
It was a kind of wow moment.
Yeah, that's what it feels like, doesn't it?
It's Trump world, and we just live in it.
So, where next?
Follow Trump 100 wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Welcome back. Our next guest has been campaigning for 4 years to help the families of children with long-term illnesses receive financial aid. Kerry Maynard Davis lost his son Hugh to cancer in 2021 when he was just 6 years old, and currently the state provides no financial support to parents who are forced to leave work to care for their seriously ill child. Thanks so much for joining us, Kerry. So I wasn't aware of that fact because at the front and centre, you've lost your beautiful, beautiful Hugh. And the last thing you're thinking about is financial aid, but it's such an important part of dealing with that situation, no doubt.
Yeah, it seems to be a loophole that's missing with these at the moment in the sort of the disability benefits and things like that. With the new neonatal bill coming into effect, parents can get 12 weeks paid leave if their baby is admitted to hospital within the first 28 days of their life, if they're in there for 7 days or more. But if the baby's 29 days and admitted to hospital, parents are left with nothing and they can't claim any financial support from day one. And current measures are you have to wait 90 days before you can even apply for DLA, which is a long wait when your child's seriously ill.
And to state the obvious, obviously, you need and you want to be there by their side. So you have to stop working.
Well, so the campaign for the neonatal bill recognised that you need constant parental presence at hospital to look after your child. And generally, the child needs a parent there. And if you're a 5-year-old, as my son was, what you want at the end of your bed is your mum and dad looking strong and positive and supporting you. You want to be on your own. And the way the system's currently set up is that parents are having to choose between work or caring for a child. And there's just no help there. And we've been trying to push now to make the government recognise that help needs to be in place, and that's the campaign so far.
And what stage are you at with that?
So under the last government, we progressed this through to the second reading of the bill, and then the then former Minister for Employment, Joe Churchill, took it through without going through the parliamentary legislative procedure, and we started work straight away on this, and we held several meetings at Department of Work and Pensions. Obviously, the election was called on the last day of our meetings, and unknowingly to us, and I know to everyone else, I presume. And we've recently had to reset, start again with Labour. Our MP Chris Hinchliffe has been absolutely supportive. We've had a question asked at PMQs where the Prime Minister didn't give any answer to the question about helping these parents. And we met with the Minister for the second time yesterday, and the government unfortunately said the position is they're not at the moment looking to help these parents at day one.
How do you feel about that?
Well, you know, I've come out the dark side of it all. I lost my Hugh 4 years ago, but we speak to parents daily with our charity that we set up. It's Never You straight after. And, you know, we get parents telling us they've sold houses, they're selling clothes on Vinted to raise money, they can't commute. I mean, it's not just losing money by being by a bedside, it's the cost of looking after a child as well, but people don't understand. And it's sadly, like, we have a petition going through at the moment. We've had 15,000 signatures in about 6 weeks. But it's one of these things that you don't think can happen to you, so people don't relate to it so much. If it was an animal or a pet or a loved one in the house, these petitions get 200,000 signatures instantly, and we're just trying to raise profile of it and just understand why these parents need so much support.
And the minister you met with yesterday was Sir Stephen Timms. How did he articulate his point of view? Was it well explained? Was it heartfelt or not?
I mean, I've been talking to a politician for a while, and I should probably give you a politician's answer here, but there was no real reason as to why they weren't be supportive of it currently. Obviously, there's a new the welfare reform coming soon, but that's looking to cut money. It's not looking to give money. And you can't reform nothing, and there's nothing at the moment in place for these parents. My argument is that whilst you support a child that's 28 days and younger, why not provide that for 29 days and older? Because you're discriminating parents against age, not condition. And we believe that all parents who have to be by bedside need that support. But there was no coherent argument to say why there wasn't any reason why they would support it. Obviously, the campaign doesn't end at that point. It's only really just the start for us now, because we're arguing, in effect, why this is needed so much. And, like, I put a post out yesterday on our channel, on the social media, for instance, Never You, and the parents were just like up in arms, really, about why they wouldn't support these parents.
So you feel that you'll keep campaigning?
I'm not going to, you know, you can't stop, because ultimately, no, sometimes they may want you to stop, but you can't, because there's such a loophole in this system. I mean, and what we're asking for, compared to what the government is spending currently on other things, we're asking for effects of £6 million a year. That's all we're asking for, and that's to provide parents with 2 months of a grant that they can to be supported in such a terrible time. And, you know, campaigners for the neonatal bill estimated it was £14 million a year that would cost for 66,000 parents a year. We're quoting it on 4,000 parents a year, we're quoting it on.
OK, thank you so much for joining us and keeping us updated on this. You're doing the memory of few incredibly proud, and we'll invite Sir Stephen Timms on and ask him about this.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. Let's have a look at the weather now.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
A developing northerly wind will make it much colder over the next few days, with wintry showers and widespread overnight frosts. It's mostly fine but cold now, with an extensive frost over northern and central parts. There are some mainly coastal showers in the north and the east. Northern parts will see the showers spreading further inland this morning, with some snow likely on the Scottish hills, but most places will remain dry and sunny, with various outbreaks of sunshine. Southern parts will have the best of the sunny days.
The perfect climate, whatever the forecast. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
We're going to take a quick break here. We'll be back with all of the day's top stories here on Sky News Breakfast. Don't go anywhere. We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. We just want her home. We hear from the father of a British tourist taken away in handcuffs and detained in the US for 14 days over a visa mix-up.
Plus, the government tells this programme they'll change the law to stop the Sentencing Council giving preferential treatment to minority groups.
And fancy fish fingers for tea. We'll tell you why it might make your child kinder.
It's Tuesday, March the 11th. Your headlines. A British tourist on a backpacking trip around North America is detained by US authorities for 2 weeks over a visa issue.
It's turned into a nightmare for her, for us, and what's happened just seems so totally unbelievable due to a visa mix-up, a paperwork issue.
Also ahead, fires are still burning on 2 ships that collided in the North Sea. Environmentalists warn of a potential ecological catastrophe.
Here in Grimsby, the search for the last remaining crew member has now been called off as the focus now moves into an investigation into what caused such a serious collision.
And I'm on the Cleethorpes coastline where wildlife groups fear a potential environmental catastrophe if thousands of seals and birds that live along these shores come into contact with the oil and toxic chemicals.
Three people are killed and Moscow's biggest airport suspends flights after a Ukrainian drone attack as peace talks get underway in Saudi Arabia. A very good morning to you. A British tourist on a backpacking holiday has been detained in the US for the past 14 days over a mistake with her visa. Her dad, Paul, described to this programme that the 28-year-old Rebecca Burke was taken away in handcuffs and put in a detention facility. He said that she was forced to wear a prison jumpsuit and is surviving on rice and beans because she's a vegan and they can't give her the right food. This was what he had to say last hour.
She'd been planning this trip for a long time, did lots of research ahead of it. She left in January for what was meant to be a once-in-a-lifetime trip, travelling, hiking, sightseeing throughout North America. Initially, my wife and I were quite nervous that our daughter, a young woman, was going solo travelling. But when she told us it was the USA and Canada, we thought, well, of all the countries in the world, probably 2 of the safest countries for a British tourist to go to would be USA and Canada. But what was meant to be life-changing for her, she'd planned it to really expand her horizons and enjoy the natural countryside in USA and Canada. It's turned into a nightmare for her, for us, and what's happened just seems so totally unbelievable due to a visa mix-up, a paperwork issue. She was detained by US Immigration, ICE, and unbelievably taken by Homeland Security in handcuffs to a large detention centre in Tacoma, Washington. She's been there now for 14 days, and the conditions that she's in, again, it's another description of something that your viewers and wife and I, no one we tell, can believe.
Well, Sadia is here with Leah and I to discuss that interview and the story more broadly, Sadia, because just to remind our viewers, if they're just tuning in, exactly what's happened here.
So Rebecca Burke is a 28-year-old graphic artist from Britain who went on a 4-month backpacking tour of North America. She entered the US earlier this year and then was on her way to go to Canada, having stayed in America, visited New York and also Oregon. And it was when she got to Canada that they turned her away, the Canadian authorities, saying that her paperwork wasn't in order. So as she's trying to re-enter the US now, she's then taken away, and it appears that there is an issue with her visa because she had gone in on a tourist visa. She's thinking of this as a 4-month-long holiday, but while she was in Oregon, she stayed with a family, and the terms of that arrangement was that she would do some household work for them, and in exchange, she could stay there essentially for free. But US Customs and Border Protection has rules around these things, and one of those is that you cannot enter the country if you are going to do any sort of work, and that includes working in someone's house, doing household work in exchange for room and board. So we heard from her father there, they're very concerned, and you can hear from his voice, I mean, this is someone, he's saying that he's speaking to everyone, he's speaking to his MP, he's trying to get in touch with the UK ambassador to the US, as well as lots of other people. He said that there were offers of help from people wanting to go there and to see her. Let's have a listen to what Matthew Pennycook, the MP, told us a short while ago.
So I'm limited in what I can say on this case, but we are aware of that UK national who's been detained in the United States. We're providing support. We're in contact with the local authorities in the area, but that's about all I can say at this stage on that particular case.
Is it more important to maintain good relations with Donald Trump?
I don't think that's an issue in this particular case. I think the individual is detained for very specific reasons. We're providing support to them and are in contact with the local authorities in the area.
We should say as well, in the interview, Paul Burke was pretty warm about the government in general efforts to try and help them. The only other thing I was just thinking about this more is, you know, when you enter the US, they are always, there's endless questions you have to answer. One of them is always along the grounds, have you ever been denied entry to any country, which I guess, you know, had just happened with the Canada issue. I think either way is really felt watching that interview with Paul, with her father. It feels like a very minor snafu, a minor error, and 14 days with the prospect of about 10 more is what he said.
It
in a detention centre is severe.
Yeah, of course. It brings into focus, doesn't it? You know, you get really excited about a trip. I've seen a reel posted on her Instagram about how excited she was and the experiences she had in Canada and across the US. But it brings home, focus in on the fact that if you are going abroad, if you're watching this morning, if you're volunteering, if you're studying, you need the correct visa. And it's so hard for Paul.
Absolutely. Sure. Sadia, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. We're going to have a bit more of Paul's interview again at hour. Now, there are growing fears of a potential environmental catastrophe in the North Sea. An oil tanker that was carrying jet fuel and a cargo vessel containing toxic chemicals is still blazing after they collided off the Yorkshire coast. 36 crew members were rescued from the wreckage, but the search was called off for the final missing worker last night. Now, the investigation into what happened begins. This is the latest live shot of the tanker in the North Sea. Well, we'll get that for you in just a moment, but those are pictures from yesterday for you now. We're joined now by our North of England correspondent, Katie Barnfield, and our science correspondent, Thomas Moore. Katie, what is the latest, particularly in light of the search for that missing crew member?
Yes, well, unfortunately, that search and rescue operation for that one remaining crew member who was still unaccounted for was called off last night by the Coastguard just before 10 o'clock in the evening after what they said was an extensive search. We know that person was a member of the crew of the So Long, the cargo ship that collided with the oil tanker, the Stena Immaculate, yesterday morning. We understand that all the remaining crew members, all the other crew members from both vessels are safe and accounted for. As we understand it, only one person needed hospital treatment. Now, this morning here in the port of Grimsby, vessels have been held back, held in port and not allowed to go out because of an exclusion zone around the site of the collision. The fire on the tanker, the Stena Immaculate, raged all throughout the night and into this morning, although the very latest pictures that we have seen from the site of the collision seem to show that is now calming down, although there is quite extensive damage to one side of the Stena Immaculate. It was, of course, carrying 220,000 barrels of jet fuel for the US Navy at the time of the impact, some of which, of course, has been spilling into the North Sea. And the focus now is on, firstly, containing the environmental impact of that spill, but then also on investigating exactly how this was able to happen. At the moment, we just don't know what caused this collision. We know that the visibility was quite poor in the area yesterday, but that both ships had radar equipment on board. The Marine Accident Investigation Branch has started a preliminary investigation. They sent a team here to Grimsby last night. They've been starting to gather evidence and speak to witnesses. They will then decide whether to open a full investigation. Ultimately, though, it's the flag states of both ships, the US and Portugal, that will be responsible for finding out exactly what happened.
Katie, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. Let's pivot to that potential environmental impact. Science correspondent Thomas Moore, as you can see, standing by as well. Thomas, what is the fear there? And also just touch on whether there is a direct risk to humans as well.
Well, the fire has been so intense that people still don't understand what is in the water and how much, and that will determine the environmental impact of this collision. So I'm standing in the Humber estuary here, and 140,000 wading birds overwinter on these mud flats. You've got Atlantic grey seals, and further out towards Spurn Head there, you've got whales and dolphins that tend to feed and pass through the area, and also 500,000 seabirds on the cliffs further north at Bempton Cliffs. So there's an awful lot of wildlife here which would be in harm's way if there is a significant leak of chemicals from that collision. So what are those chemicals? Well, top of the list, of course, would be the jet fuel, kerosene. That's quite a light oil, which much of it will have burnt off. If it has got into the water, it will evaporate quite swiftly. So any impact would be quite localised to the collision site. If there's heavier oil, bunker oil that fuels those ships, that's really sticky, tarry stuff that clogs the fur and the feathers of wildlife. That would be a major risk if there is a spill of that oil. And then, of course, there's the stuff that was on the the cargo ship, the container ship. We believe there were 15 containers of sodium cyanide. That is extremely toxic in contact with water, and still other stuff that is on that ship that we don't yet know about. And people are going through the cargo inventory just to make sure.
Thomas, Katie, thank you both so much. Let's now remind you as well, by the way, if you want ongoing updates and some of the live pictures we've got coming in from our chopper as well, you can scan the QR code there on the side of your screen. In the meantime, time for all of the day's other top stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Triple murderer Carl Clifford is set to be sentenced today over the deaths of his ex-partner, Louise Hunt, her mother and her sister in July last year. The 26-year-old admitted to using a crossbow and knife to commit the killings, and last week he was also convicted of raping Louise after she ended their 18-month relationship. Let's go live now to our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, who joins us now. Horrific details from this case, Martin, but the heart of this, 3 victims whose lives were cut short.
Yes, I mean, we're going to get a brief outline of those crimes again this morning. That won't last very long because we got an awful lot of detail last week during the very brief trial on that rape charge. So we'll hear something from the prosecution, and then it will be up to Kyle Clifford's lawyer to offer any mitigation, and it seems that that's going to be very, very difficult, and certainly will be a short speech from the defence. Kyle Clifford is a prime candidate for a whole life sentence, which means that almost certainly he won't get the chance for parole. It's a question for the judge, of course, but he qualifies for a whole life sentence for a number of reasons. There are multiple murders. He used extreme violence. There was a sexual element, the rape of his former girlfriend Louise, and it's her rejection of him that appears to have triggered these terrible crimes. He planned and premeditated what he was going to do over at least a fortnight, and all of that, I think, will persuade the judge to give him a whole life sentence. I think it's unlikely we'll see Clifford today because all last week during that brief trial he refused to come to court in spite of the judge's entreaties for him to be here. The Hunt family will be here. They were here through the 3 days of the trial last week, led by John Hunt, Carol Hunt's husband, widower now, and the father of the 2 murdered women. He's expected to give a victim impact statement. So too are other members of the family. We should hear what the sentence is going to be perhaps by lunchtime. I think there are plans to stream it live, so viewers will be able to hear what the judge says before he delivers that sentence.
OK, Martin, for now, thank you. Officials from more than 30 nations are meeting in Paris today for more Ukraine talks. French President Emmanuel Macron is set to address the gathering, which will discuss a security force for Kyiv to deter Russia from launching another offensive. It comes after last week's emergency summit in Brussels. The Prime Minister is facing his first big test since the general election after Mike Amesbury announced he would quit Parliament following his conviction for assault. Amesbury admitted to punching a man in Cheshire in October and was given a 10-week suspended sentence. The move has triggered a by-election in Runcorn and Helsby.
Yeah, thank you. Let's go to live pictures that are coming in at the moment from Jeddah, where we do expect talks to start shortly to try and achieve a ceasefire deal, of course, between Russia and Ukraine. You can see there the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and next to him was Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor. Obviously, now we can't see them, but there is our Alex Rossi. He's in the room.
Secretary Rubio, Sky News. Do you think you'll get a ceasefire?
Quite extraordinary here, pictures inside the room. Marco Rubio, you saw there, Alex Rossi trying to pose a question to him, sitting next to Mike Waltz. It looks like from these pictures that it's the US sitting opposite only one side. I'm not quite sure who's at the table with them. There's obviously some of their Saudi hosts at the head of the table. But it looked like it was the US on one side of the table and others on the... Here is Alex. I don't know if Alex can hear us. If Alex can hear us, then it'd be great to get an update of the vibe he felt in the room. I don't think he can. Quite rare pictures here inside a Saudi palace. Maybe Alex can hear us now. If you can, Alex, then do give us an update on the vibe in the room there. We caught the end of it, and obviously you tried to ask Marco Rubio a question. Talk us through what you saw there in the room, if you can hear us, Alex.
Well, the officials were all there. Sorry, we're just having to re-rig sorry, I'm just putting my earpiece back in now. We're just being moved out of where the delegates are. You can see there, it was really just a photo opportunity to show that these talks are starting. President Zelensky, of course, is not there. He was in Saudi Arabia yesterday to meet the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. But in the room was the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who is leading the delegation for the Americans. We also saw Andrei Yermak, who's the President's Chief of Staff on the Ukrainian side, joined by the Defence Minister, the Foreign Minister as well. Steve Witkoff's in there as well, the Middle East envoy for the United States, really seen as a sort of chief negotiator for the Trump administration, and Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor. Now, I think they all look fairly stern-faced around the table, no questions at all. They didn't want to countenance any of that. We were told not to ask questions before we went in, but I think they are optimistic that they can see what the shape of a ceasefire deal looks like in time. So really it's a way of exploring the potentials really for further negotiations. That's the aim of it. Now, the background, of course, for all of this is also for the Ukrainians to try and mend the relationship with the United States. We saw that disastrous meeting inside the Oval Office, that really quite abrasive, uncomfortable diplomatic spat between Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, the Vice President, and then on the other side, Volodymyr Zelensky. From the Ukrainian side, they want to try and mend the relationship, which will mean, I think, from the Americans' perspective, that showing that they are serious about peace negotiations. They are going to, I think, listening to the language from the Americans, have to really talk quite seriously about making concessions. Now, that may be territorial concessions. More than likely, it will be. What that will all look like, the Americans say they're not going there with any preconceived notions of what it should look like, but they really want to try and figure out what the Ukrainian position is. So that's where these talks are. If they go away with all of that at the end of the day, I think they will deem them a success. So we should hopefully understand what the shape of a ceasefire negotiation will look like. The Ukrainians also, of course, in terms of mending the relationship, they want to get a bit more clarity on the sharing of military intelligence. That was paused After that disastrous meeting with Donald Trump, also military aid as well. They want to try and get that restarted as well, because they say that the consequences for Ukraine inside Ukraine have been fairly catastrophic since all of that was stopped. So that's the kind of flavour of what we're seeing here. Taking place in the port city of Jeddah. We are in, I'll just show you here. We're in the port city of Jeddah. This is the entrance into where the delegation are meeting at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Jeddah has been chosen, or Saudi Arabia has been chosen because it's a neutral venue, seen as somewhere that can sort of balance the views of both countries. It has strong relations with the Russians and also the Americans as well. Russia, of course, is not present at these talks, and at the moment it's far from clear whether they are prepared to make any concessions at all.
The scene of a purge as well of many wealthy Saudis in, I think it was, 2018 or something, at the Ritz-Carlton, Jeddah. I remember that very clearly. Either way, Alex, great to have you with us in that live reaction as you were in the room there. Extraordinary stuff with Alex Rossi there. So to come here on The Breakfast Show, the government's promising seismic reforms to get Britain building. But will it work? We'll discuss. That's next.
Here we go.
2, 1.
You, Sophie.
The big announcement.
The battle for number 10.
The drone is above us.
It is a chaotic scene.
They've asked us to leave.
There is a clear Labour landslide.
The car is covered in.
Liberated but left in ruins.
A major incident has been declared.
That's when misinformation floods the zone.
It became clear the media weren't welcome.
These extraordinary images.
Must have been years.
Who wants to talk about politics?
OK, stand by.
I wouldn't be asking it if I didn't think it was a relevant question.
The winner of the 2024 presidential election.
Quite extraordinary events.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. I've witnessed migration across Europe close up.
I'm James Matthews and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Free, wherever you get your news.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Seagal?
I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent. Sky News, the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster. Sky News get the full story first. Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back. The government's promising what it calls seismic reforms to the planning system. They're setting out new legislation aimed at speeding up house building in a move to deliver 1.5 million new homes across the UK. Sam Richards is the chief executive of Britain Remade, a campaign which aims to promote economic growth, and joins us now. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. So how long do you think poor planning processes in the UK has been a problem?
So
I think it's important to step back and realise just how big a problem this is. We have the highest industrial electricity prices in the world and some of the most expensive domestic household energy in Europe. London has the most expensive housing in Europe. And all of this, the common thread throughout all of it, is it's far too hard to build the stuff that we need. If you want to build a new offshore wind farm, cheap, clean energy, you have to fill in tens of thousands of pages of environmental impact assessments. If you want to build new homes, you have to wrangle with dozens of government quangos. So the steps today by the government to cut through some of that bureaucracy, cut through some of that red tape, are really welcome and totally necessary.
But I guess the question, why I was asking, is how long this has been a problem, because it sort of hints at the scale of whether or not we can really believe significant progress will be made or not. Otherwise, we would have done it already.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a problem for decades, right? And successive governments have tried different planning reforms. And you had different infrastructure acts under the last Labour government, and then planning reforms were attempted under different iterations of the Conservative government. I think why I'm optimistic now is that for a first time, there is this recognition right across politics of the need to get Britain building again. The government has a big majority now, and they should be confident in being bold in delivering the reforms that we need.
Obviously, the bill will be published today. What are you looking out for as to whether you think it is sufficiently bold and going to be sufficiently effective?
So I think that there are a few key areas. One is around judicial review, that the government has already said that they want to limit the opportunity for people to be able to sue the government when new infrastructure is built. Pretty much every single road project in the country is brought to the courts. I think 60% of new infrastructure ends up being brought to the courts, adding millions of costs, tens of millions. I think it's 60 million per road is additional costs brought by lawsuits. So limiting the number of judicial review. But there's a second big bucket around our environmental protections, which, as I was saying, if you want to build new green energy, you are going to have to fill in tens of thousands of pages of environmental impact assessments. And it's these environmental rules as to why HS2 had to build a £120 million back tunnel to save the lives of 300 bats. These environmental rules are adding more costs and more delay to the system. So there's going to need to be significant changes to the way that we apply them.
What is someone that's been, I guess, focused on this for a long time, what timeline from here is a success? If this bill, which obviously won't be passed overnight, is got the things in it that you want, when do you hope to see it passed and fully effective such that we really are taking a step forward?
So the government's got their targets of 1.5 million homes by the end of the Parliament and a clean power grid, 2030 clean power grid also pretty much by the end of...
Will they hit those targets?
By the end of the Parliament. So this is why they're going to need to get the bill passed quickly. Now, you may have seen that...
But do you think those targets are achievable?
I think they are, if they deliver on the ambitious planning reform that they've said that they want to. And as I say, that means, in particular, dealing with the environmental impact assessments that too often lead to bat tunnels and fish discos and all these other examples.
Sam Richards, thanks for joining us. Good to see you.
Having me.
Still coming on The Breakfast Show, we'll hear from the father of a British tourist detained in the United States over visa issues. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Breakfast Show. Well, coming up, we'll hear from the father of a 28-year-old British tourist detained in the US for 2 weeks. He says he just wants her home. But first, a reminder of all the day's top stories.
Thank you so much, Wilfred. A British tourist, Rebecca Burke, who's on a backpacking holiday, has been detained in the United States for the past 14 days due to a mistake with her visa. The government told this programme they're aware of her case and they're working with authorities in the US to secure her release. While her father told us it's a nightmare situation and they just want her back. Talks between the US and Ukraine on ending the war have begun in Jeddah. 2 senior Ukrainian officials have said Kyiv will propose a ceasefire covering the Black Sea and long-range missile strikes. Hours before the talks, Ukraine launched what appears to be its largest drone strike on Moscow since the war began. At least 2 people were killed and 8 others were injured in the attack, which damaged apartment blocks and disrupted air travel across the Russian capital. Live pictures here of this environmental disaster that's threatening to unfold in the North Sea after an oil tanker carrying jet fuel collided with a cargo ship off the coast of East Yorkshire. 36 people were rescued from the wreckage yesterday. 1 remains missing, with the search for them now called off. Meanwhile, there are serious environmental concerns following the incident off the coast of East Yorkshire. The combination of burning jet fuel and toxic chemicals are threatening both marine wildlife and birds in the area, as well as coastal and fishing communities. And there's been a slide in the Asian markets this morning after a sell-off on Wall Street over fears of a recession in the US. Financial markets have been volatile on the back of rising trade tensions, coupled with signs of slowing economic growth in America.
European trade broadly flat, actually, and pre-market for the US is slightly higher after a brutal sell-off there on Wall Street yesterday. Just wanted to show you some live pictures from the North Sea. Ongoing coverage of that on our website, a live blog, and if you scan the QR code that's coming up on your screen, you can keep a sight on the live pictures of what was the biggest maritime collision in recent British history, of course, yesterday. Now, as Leo was just saying, a British tourist on a backpacking trip around America and Canada has been detained in the US for the past 2 weeks over a visa issue. Earlier, we spoke to the father of 28-year-old Rebecca Burke. He said she'd been taken away in handcuffs and forced to swap her clothes for a prison jumpsuit. Paul Burke also raised concerns over his daughter's health, saying she's been referred to a medic for digestive issues after only being able to eat cold rice, potatoes and beans due to a lack of catering for her vegan diet. Here's part of our interview with him.
She left in January for what was meant to be a once-in-a-lifetime trip, travelling, hiking, sightseeing throughout North America. Initially, my wife and I were quite nervous that our daughter, a young woman, was going solo travelling. But when she told us it was the USA and Canada, we thought, well, of all the countries in the world, probably 2 of the safest countries for a British tourist to go to would be USA and Canada. But what was meant to be life-changing for her, she'd planned it to really expand her horizons and enjoy the natural countryside in USA and Canada. It's turned into a nightmare for her, for us, and what's happened just seems so totally unbelievable. Due to a visa mix-up, a paperwork issue, she was detained by US Immigration, ICE, and unbelievably taken by Homeland Security in handcuffs to a large detention centre in Tacoma, Washington. She's been there now for 14 days, and the conditions that she's in, again, it's another description of something that your viewers and wife and I, no one we tell, can believe.
So can you expand on that a little bit for us? When was the last time you spoke to her, and what was she saying about her state and the conditions she's in?
Well, we speak to every day. Nobody can contact her, but she's allowed to make phone calls out from a prison iPad, and the iPad is shared between 14 other women in the detention centre. But the conditions, when she arrived there, she had all her possessions confiscated. She had to swap her clothes for a prison jumpsuit. She is a vegan, and they obviously don't know how to deal with vegans, so she's been fed cold rice and potatoes and mushy beans for 14 days. Yesterday, we spoke to her last night, and she said she had to go and see the medic because she's got digestive problems. And I think if you or I had cold rice and potatoes and mushy beans for 14 days, we'd probably have digestive problems. When people, we've got a few very kind people who have offered to go and visit her in the state of Washington, and they have said that when they visit, she's behind a glass screen and they have to talk via a telephone.
And
have you been given the British tourist is being held in such conditions?
Have you been given any guidance, Paul? Any updates on the process from here and any help from the British government?
Generally, it's been quite unclear, but I've got to say the help I've had from our local MP in Monmouthshire, Catherine Fuchs, and her office, her team, they responded almost immediately. About 12 days ago, I contacted them. They responded immediately, and they've been communicating with me ever since. Catherine Fuchs has escalated this to David Lammy's desk, and she's trying to get it onto Peter Mandelson's desk as our ambassador in the US. So really doing everything they can. The British consulate in London and the British consulate in San Francisco have been very communicative. So lots of dialogue, speaking to them or emailing them every day. However, it doesn't seem to matter what level it gets to. The US system, the system that ICE, the processes and procedures of ICE, they're just going to carry on and follow their process. So it doesn't seem like anyone can influence them. I do have one slight bit of positive news from our call with Becky at 10 o'clock last night. She said that for the first time in many days, an ICE officer visited her and he said, "Oh, your case is getting a high profile. I'm going to have to put you up the priority list." So I think all the media and political pressure and the British consulate, I think together it's now raised the profile such that she's being put up the priority list. But she was told by the ICE officer it could still be another 10 days. Why can it not be tomorrow?
Do you get the feeling?
We just want her home.
Do you get the feeling that a lot of this is caused by the recent change in government in the United States?
I really don't know. One thing I do know, I know there have been policy changes around immigration, so I absolutely know for sure that the change in immigration policy and the crackdown has caused people to be swept up in the system that would normally not. Basically, tourists are being swept up. But what makes it worse for the tourists, which are being swept up, is that the detention centres are being filled because of the crackdown. Becky told us a few days ago that her detention centre, which is a 1,500 women detention centre, it will be at capacity next week. So I think part of the reason why this has been such a slow, really slow process is because of the workload that ICE are having to go through. So I can't really, I can't really get angry at the ICE organisation. They're just being totally overloaded with cases. So if you're an innocent tourist, you're still at the back of a long queue of paperwork for ice to go through.
Well, much more on that story as well on our website. The heartfelt testimony there of the father of Becky, who's been detained in the US. Ongoing coverage there of the live shot in the North Sea, which you can scan the QR code on the screen now if you want to continue to watch the latest details following that ship collision yesterday. We're going to continue to talk about that story now and particularly focus on the concerns for the potential environmental impact of the collision and the explosion and talk to Dr. Simon Boxall, a senior lecturer in oceanography at the University of Southampton. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Boxall. Talk to us about your interpretation of the significance of what was on board both of these ships, the liquids involved and the damage they might do.
Let's look at the first ship, the Stena ship. That was carrying a substantial amount of jet fuel, aviation fuel. Jet fuel is a little bit like diesel. It is kerosene, effectively. And the concerns with the jet fuel is that at certain temperatures, it's very volatile. Now, at sort of sea temperatures, it's not too bad. The other problem is it's very toxic. There's an irony that crude oil is the least toxic of the oils that get spilled into the oceans. And there are bacteria, there are microbes that break down the crude oil. When it gets to things like refined oils, like the jet fuel, that has a much higher toxicity. If you like, it's concentrated by the refining process. And so the impact of that on life in the oceans will be devastating. We've then got the sodium cyanide, and there are 15 containers of sodium cyanide on the cargo vessel, the Solong, that ploughed into the Stena Immaculate. Now, we don't know yet whether those have spilled into the sea. If they haven't, then things will be okay. But if they have, it reacts with water, which is not good news, and also has a bigger reaction at high temperatures. So if they did fall into the sea in the middle of that huge fireball, then they turn very rapidly to hydrogen cyanide, which is really quite a dangerous gas. Now, pictures are coming in now show that the Stena Immaculate has significant damage, but it looks like it's still afloat, and it also looks like it's not ruptured its other tanks. We don't know for certain yet, and that's good news for the environment. We are still waiting to know whether any of those containers have fallen into the sea from the Solong.
What are the risks to human life on the coasts? I mean, could things be toxic for them?
They could. Certainly the aviation fuel is toxic. And obviously this sodium cyanide is also toxic. However, at the moment, the winds have veered round towards the northwest. They were northeasterly yesterday, and that will blow some of the material away from the coastline for the moment. But we still wait to see reports as to what's gone into the ocean. Initial thoughts were this is going to be quite a major disaster. It looks like, luckily with one-day ships, things have remained reasonably intact in spite of that huge fireball. Only time will tell. We'll probably know in the next few hours as to how bad this is going to be.
How good are we at these sorts of tidy-ups?
In the UK, very good. We have probably one of the most efficient oil spill response teams in the world, ironically based here in Southampton. But we are very, very good at dealing with these things. The problem so far been, of course, is that getting close to the ships with the fireballs, with the dangerous chemicals, with the toxicity has been difficult. But now things are sort of settling down. They have a chance to get to the ships to try and block any leaks off, and also to recover any containers that have spilled into the sea. So the UK, the Coastguard agency, is incredibly good at dealing with this sort of thing.
Dr. Boxall, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Still to come on the breakfast show, a volatile day on the markets. We'll get the latest with Mohammed El-Arian. That's next.
Here we go.
2, 1.
You, Sophie.
The big announcement.
The battle for number 10.
The drone is above us.
It is a chaotic scene.
They've asked us to leave.
It is a clear Labour landslide.
The car is covered in.
Liberated but left in ruins.
A major incident has been declared.
That's when misinformation floods the zone.
It became clear the media weren't welcome.
These extraordinary images.
Must have been years.
Who wants to talk about politics?
OK, stand by.
I wouldn't be asking it if I didn't think it was a relevant question.
The winner of the 2024 presidential election.
Quite extraordinary events.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. I've witnessed migration across Europe close up.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Free, wherever you get your news.
I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Seagal? I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent. Sky News, the full story first.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
I just took a shower above the clouds. You know why? Because this is the Emirates A380. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Welcome back. We just showed you the markets. It showed European markets just higher today, following what was somewhat of a bloodbath yesterday. Let's talk about it all with Mohammed El-Erian. He's the Chief Economic Advisor at Allianz and joins us now. Mohammed, great to see you as always. There's a bit of a calmness in markets today, which hides what happened yesterday. If we talk about the US, the Wall Street and the NASDAQ in particular, down a massive 4% for a single day. It's now down 13% from its December high. What's triggering all of this sudden selling, particularly in US equities?
Thank you for having me, Wilfred. What's triggering it is a growth scare. The characterization of the US economy has gone from exceptionalism to one that is slowing, may be losing its edge, and risks a higher recession probability. So there's been a complete upending of the consensus views about growth of US versus Europe. And with that, there's been a complete upending of all the consensus trade, including strong US stocks that outperform the rest of the world.
To what extent is that driven by policy that's now governing the US economy, given the election victory of Donald Trump and I guess tariffs in particular? And in the last few days, late last week from his Treasury Secretary, yesterday from him, rhetoric that this time round, maybe unlike last time round, he's willing to take short-term pain if it is going to deliver the long-term gain he claims that it will.
So first, the narrative has evolved coming out of the White House. Initially, it was, we will not have any adverse consequences from tariffs. Now it is short-term pain, like you said, for long-term gain. little disturbances, is how President Trump put it, that ultimately the destination is one of a more efficient country that operates in a fairer trading system, where the government is no longer dominant and where private sector flourishes. That is the destination. And the view from the White House is that a few bumps along the way in the journey warrant that destination. The issue is that those bumps may make this destination very unlikely, because what we're seeing is, because of not just the policy uncertainty on tariffs, which you mentioned, Wilfred, but also what's happening to the government, the way the government operates, is increasing income insecurity. It's making businesses increasingly adopt a wait-and-see attitude, and is making consumers hesitant. And the survey data has weakened tremendously. So while there may be a better destination, the journey may not just be bumpy, it may be uncertain.
On the flip side, in Europe, we've seen bond yields rise once again, triggered mainly last week or so from talk that the German government's going to spend a lot more money. If you're then not a government that's going to be able to spend a lot more money, is that a bad thing for the UK because it sort of pushes up our bond yields, but we're not getting the extra fiscal stimulus at the same time as Germany will be getting?
So like you say, the reason why yields have gone up in Europe is because of what a lot of people think of as the Sputnik moment, this notion that Europe has now been shaken into a realization that it has to take its defense much more seriously. It can no longer rely on the US. And Germany in particular, that has enormous fiscal space, will now spend money not just on defense, on infrastructure, and on pan-European activities. So that has pushed yields up. But you're absolutely right. The UK finds itself on the receiving end of some of the upward pressure. Put another way, its yields haven't come down as much as the US, as you would normally expect. And the UK doesn't have the Sputnik moment going on. The UK does not have the fiscal space. If anything, we have the need to create fiscal headroom now. And that's why there's talk about welfare cuts. So yes, Europe may benefit from the positive income effects, but here in the UK, the cost may be higher yields than there would have been otherwise.
Mohammed, it's always great to catch up. Thanks so much for jumping on with us.
Thank you.
Mohammed El-Erian there, live in Cambridge. European markets broadly flat to higher today, despite big selling yesterday. As we wrap up here on The Breakfast Show, let's go for an update from Alex Rossi in Jeddah. We joined him, of course, live moments earlier when he was being kicked out of the room with Saudi, Ukrainian, American diplomats. And here with another update. What is the latest, Alex?
Well, Wilf, we're where we belong now. We're back in the press room. I'll just show you in here. You can see the journalists, lots of different countries represented here, such as the interest in these negotiations. But we're at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. This is the conference centre. Now, through the room over there, through an ante-room, across a corridor, and you get to where the delegates are talking. We were taken in to see, just before the meeting started, fairly stern faces around that table. Again, a reflection of the seriousness of these discussions. I think the best way, really, of characterising this is it's a prelude to further talks. They really want to explore where the Ukrainians, the Americans do, where the Ukrainians lie, what kind of concessions that they are prepared to make. And I think listening to what Marco Rubio, the American Secretary of State, who on his way here said, they want to see how serious they are, how serious they are about doing a peace deal. They are optimistic that they will make some progress today. And I think the ambition from the delegates on both sides, the Ukrainian and the American side, is that by the end of the day, they will have at least some kind of shape of what a ceasefire negotiation will look like to end the Russian-Ukraine war.
Alex, great stuff live in Jeddah for us. A quick final thought on the show from Katie in Grimsby as we look at live pictures from the North Sea. Katie, what is the mood there this morning?
Well, quite sombre, unfortunately, after the search was called off for that last remaining crew member. One person still missing from the crew of the Solong, the cargo ship that collided with that oil tanker, the Stena Immaculate. All the other crew members are safe and accounted for. Only one person, as we understand it, needed hospital treatment. As for the scene of the accident, the fire that was raging throughout the night on the Stena Immaculate does seem to be calming down, although there is very extensive damage to one side of it with water pouring out of it. The focus now moves on to investigating exactly how such a serious collision was able to happen.
Katie, thanks so much for that. That does it for us on The Breakfast Show now. All of the day's top stories coming up, though, next after this short break with Gareth Barlow.
Sky News get the full story first. Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle, really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's